Chapter 1667, Banquet. With Ling Han's speed, returning to Joint Peace Planet really did not need too much time. After advancing into the Great Saint tier, the limits of his cultivation level continued to be unlocked. He had gained a breakthrough improvement in the lightning flash. Though his speed had not increased, the time that he could continuously use it had been extended considerably. At first he had estimated he would arrive in about a year's time, but in truth he had only taken 9 months' time because he had used lightning flash in the journey to speed himself up, which saved him as much as 3 months' time. After returning to the Great Ling Empire, Ling Han did not make a great fanfare of it, but when Feng Piyun and the others knew that he had become a saint, they were still incredibly surprised and pleased, and were determined to throw a celebration for him. When the news spread out, the elites from the surrounding great stars all arrived personally. Firstly, to see it with their own eyes, and secondly, they did not dare be absent. A saint had succeeded, Dao, and you actually did not come to offer your congratulations? Were you looking down on the saint? This feast naturally needed some time to prepare, and Ling Han began his work of moving people. Those by his side naturally entered into the Black Tower, but it was impossible that Ling Han would be so trusting of every single person, and allow the Black Tower to become public knowledge. He began to forge spatial god tools, and when the time came he would only have to place people inside, and he would be able to bring a few more people with him. Moreover, he had no plans of bringing too many people into the celestial realm. Firstly, everyone was far from touching the ceiling to their cultivation, and it was completely fine for them to stay in the ancient realm first and reach the heavenly body tier, eternal river tier and Genesis tier. Secondly, he had no foundations at all in the celestial realm. If he brought a lot of people with him, what kind of arrangements should he make for them? And in future, after he advanced into the severing mundane tier, he would be able to freely travel to and fro between the celestial realm and ancient realm. He just had to be faster to avoid the fate of having his lifespan severed. 5 days later, the elites from the chaotic star's majestic empire were the first to arrive. There were the left and right ministers and the great generals. In this galaxy they were elites that stood at the apex, but in front of the present Ling Han, they did not even dare to stand up straight. Saint, that was the true dragon from the 9 heavens. The left minister was also rueful. In the past he had even warned Ling Han to keep his distance from his youngest daughter, and thought that Ling Han was unworthy to associate with her, but now, if he had known that Ling Han would become a saint, how could he have possibly objected? Who knew, he might already be the father-in-law of a saint by now. Sigh. However, Li Weiwei and Ling Han's relations were still amicable. In truth, the two of them only had a very pure friendship. It was only the left minister himself who had a misconception. This girl was very carefree, and the moment she spotted him she shouted, "Ling Han! Ling Han!" Girl? The left minister's face had turned green from shock, and hurriedly pulled his daughter back. That is a saint, you have to respectfully pay your greetings. Li Weiwei gave a small pout. She thought that there was not much that had changed in Ling Han as compared to the past, so why did she suddenly have to pay her greetings now? She did not dare disobey her father, primarily because the left minister's present expression was too pitiful. If she dared call out Ling Han again, her old father would probably pass out from the extreme anxiety. She gave a slight curtsy, about to bow, yet Ling Han had already reached her, and stretched out his hands into the air. A force immediately stopped her from continuing to bow. Ling Han smiled and asked, "What need is there for you to be so reserved with me?" That's right. Li Weiwei had not wanted to bow in the first place and immediately went along with the flow. "Little Han, you are very incredible now." Ling Han laughed. "That's right, who do you think I am?" In front of friends he did not mind a little teasing. Jiyuner also came, pursing her lips in a smile at the sidelines. In the past, among the 3 great beauties of the imperial capital, only she and Li Weiwei had not married, and their presence here also caught the attention of others, especially because they had a connection with Ling Han, which caused a considerable number of forces to have some ideas. If they could marry these 2 women, then wouldn't they have boarded Ling Han's great ship? Of course, it was not everyone that dared have such thoughts, fearing that Ling Han had some relationship with the 2 women that they were unaware of. What if they were lovers? Then they really would be seeking their own deaths. Half a month later, the elites from the other great stars also gradually arrived, and another half-month later, the great banquet officially began. Ling Han sat high up on the throne while there were masses beneath. There were as many as hundreds of thousands of people, and everywhere he looked there were heads. Meanwhile, seated at his side were his 2 brothers Feng Piyun and Murong Qin, and his uncle Yu Jinshan and cousin Yu Kaiyu were seated on the other. The two of them were the most shocked. Previously, Ling Han had united the whole lower realm, and even opened the sky and entered into the immortal realm. This was already unfathomable to them, but they had never imagined that Ling Han would be invincible even in the immortal realm by now, and was about to enter into the celestial realm. Celestial realm, the final land of immortality. Ling Han. The Empress sent a mental thought to Ling Han from inside the Black Tower. With a thought from Ling Han, the Empress was summoned out. Sister-in-law. Both Feng Piyun and Murong Qing greeted. They knew that the Empress was in seclusion inside the Black Tower. Yu Kaiyu also greeted her but did not dare look too long at her. This sister-in-law was too beautiful. The Empress nodded in response. If it were not for the fact that these three men were Ling Han's elder brothers, she would not have paid them any regard. She was really too proud. About to break through? Ling Han asked. And? The Empress nodded. Wait for me. She took a step and had already arrived in the galaxy. The great Saint Tribulation that she had to undergo was also incredibly terrifying, more frightening even than the Saint King Tribulation that others had to go through. If she did not hurry to leave, Joint Peace Planet would no longer exist. Your Majesty. The left minister and the others hurriedly bowed. They were relatively more reverent of the Empress. After all, they had been cautiously living under the Empress's authority for about 1 million years. Boom, lightning suddenly appeared in the galaxy. Even if there was a boundless distance separating them, it could still be clearly seen. Multiple giants of lightning thousands of meters tall appeared, surrounding and attacking the Empress in the galaxy. Everyone's faces turned pale as they watched that sea-like lightning, breaking out in a cold sweat. Even if they were standing here, they could still feel how frightening that lightning was. Her Majesty has also become a saint. The left minister and the others were all incredibly surprised and joyous. In their eyes, the stronger the Empress, the better, naturally. They were all soldiers under the Empress's rule. Long live your Majesty. The people that belonged to the chaotic star's majestic empire all knelt and bowed. The people of the Great Ling Empire, meanwhile, bore smiles of pride. No matter how strong the Empress was, she was still their king's woman. Ling Han's figure leaped, and he also entered the galaxy. He wanted to freeload the Empress's heavenly tribulation, and get himself some heavenly tribulation fluid. At present, the Empress was able to match this kind of heavenly tribulation, but was unable to forcefully enter into the heavenly tribulation to obtain the heavenly tribulation fluid. After all, the Empress did not have as strong a physique as he did, and could not bear being attacked simultaneously by as many as millions and millions of peak stage Saint Kings. She could only do so after she became a Saint King. And that wasn't certain either. Ling Han stretched out a hand, delivering an attack at a lightning giant. Being crushed by the frightening power, the lightning giants immediately crumbled, and the heaven and earth was furious. New tribulation clouds appeared, forming a second heavenly tribulation. Above Joint Peace Planet, everyone was watching with gaping mouths. There actually was someone that would actively trifle with the heavenly tribulation. If this was any other person, that would be an idiot, but in Ling Han's case, he was a freak. Boom. Ling Han directly entered into the innermost depths of the heavenly tribulation. He wanted to finish this as soon as possible. Chapter 1668, Clearing Off Old Debts. How could the heavenly tribulation stop Ling Han? Its might had already reached the limits of the immortal realm, and even if Ling Han was helping the Empress undergo her heavenly tribulation, which logically would increase the might of the heavenly tribulation 10 times further, how was it supposed to increase by now? Boom boom boom. The heaven and earth was raging furiously, but only more lightning giants appeared. Ling Han did not pay them any regard at all. Like with a chariot rolling out, ping ping ping, any lightning giant would be crushed. Though they could still reform, they were completely unable to stop Ling Han's advance. Very soon, he had charged into the depths of the tribulation clouds, and easily obtained the heavenly tribulation fluid. The heavenly tribulation suddenly vanished. On Joint Peace Planet, everyone was once again dumbfounded. What on earth is going on? The heaven and earth would also bully the weak and fear the strong? Why had the heavenly tribulation just struck a few times and then ran off? Ling Han watched from the sidelines. The Empress had just broken through and could use the heavenly tribulation to temper her battle prowess, but right before the heavenly tribulation was about to dissipate, he had charged into the tribulation clouds and obtained a portion of heavenly tribulation fluid again. The two of them exchanged a smile and walked back to Joint Peace Planet holding hands. Everyone knelt down and bowed, numb with excitement. Two saints in one family, what kind of concept was this? Putting aside Joint Peace Planet, even in the whole galaxy and all the galaxies around, that was incredibly impressive. They did not know that Ling Han and the Empress's battle prowess could actually overwhelm all Saint Kings, or there would probably be a great many people that would pass out from the excitement. Congratulations, sister-in-law. Feng Piyun and the others all approached to offer their congratulations. Though Li Weiwei and Ji Yuner behaved very casually with Ling Han, and were very carefree when they spent time together, they were like tame lambs that had seen a tiger in front of the Empress, and were not able to even take a step forwards. Instead, it was the left minister and the others that came forwards with congratulations. In any case, they had been incredibly reverent towards the Empress in the past, so there was not much difference now. The banquet had yet to end, but Ling Han had brought the Empress with him and ran. They had separated for 8 years, and had not spent many days together when the Empress began her seclusion period. Now that she had successfully accomplished her goal, they naturally had to work hard a bit on having children. The night of romance was always too short. Ling Han and the Empress clung together for a whole 8 days before ending their loving time together, and did some serious business. Another month later, everyone was prepared. Ling Han took those closest to him, such as Yu Zhenshan, Feng Piyun and the others, into the Black Tower, whereas the others were drawn into a spatial god tool and then moved to leave. He delegated the responsibility for the Chaotic Star's Majestic Empire and the Great Ling Empire to the Left Minister and the others, and Ling Han spent some more effort to lay out a saint-level formation. As long as the formation was here, then even a great saint would not be able to do anything against them. It was not that Ling Han was not coming back. With the extended lifespans of cultivators of the immortal realm, even if he went off to the celestial realm and came back only 10,000 years later, there would actually not be too much change here. He could leave with an easy heart. 9 months later, Ling Han returned to Woodfigure Planet, and then directly went to the Mystery Realm. That Mystery Realm that had a different cultivation system was now called the Great River Mystery Realm because the natives inside all shared this identical label. Ling Han released everyone from inside the spatial god tool. If they cultivated here, the effects would be a good many times better. However, when he had just entered into the Great River Mystery Realm, Ling Han gave a soft E. Compared to more than a year ago, the spiritual chi of this place had weakened slightly, though it was still very dense compared to other places. This initially was a completely sealed-off world, and now that it had been opened, it was inevitable that the spiritual chi would leak out. Going by that theory, there would ultimately come a day when this mystery realm would become ordinary, just like that frightening corpse inside. It would also completely vanish one day, and the inheritance and traditions of the natives would completely die out by then. Ling Han felt internally rueful, but the others were endlessly pleased and surprised. The spiritual chi of this place was too dense, so much so that they did not even dare imagine it could be this way. The Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden and the others were naturally still at the Yuan tribe. Ling Han had just arrived when a few of them said that they were about to break through. Everyone underwent heavenly tribulation one after another, and Ling Han continued to freeload off their heavenly tribulation. He could even disperse the heavenly tribulation for someone because this heaven and earth could no longer do anything to him. But when the 10th person underwent the heavenly tribulation and Ling Han barged in, he discovered that the heavenly tribulation actually ignored him completely. There were no new tribulation clouds appearing, as if the heaven and earth also knew that they had no effect on him, so they were too lazy to even bother. How could that be allowed? Ling Han directly charged into that person's heavenly tribulation, but something that caused him depression happened. The tribulation clouds shrank and instantly vanished. Fled. The heavenly tribulation actually fled. The Empress and the others were also very astonished, but then they all broke into laughter. This Ling Han was really a freak, scaring the heavenly tribulation into fleeing. This was something that had never happened before. Then didn't that mean that as long as Ling Han was willing, he could make it so that there would be no more heavenly tribulation in the whole immortal realm? Ling Han tried a few more times. It was of no use. Now, as long as he interfered in anyone else's heavenly tribulation, not only would there be no new heavenly tribulation targeting him, even the heavenly tribulation of others would also vanish. This brought the others amusement, but they couldn't help but also feel rueful. To exactly what extent was this guy strong that he could even make the heavenly tribulation turn and flee before him? Ling Han gave up the idea of obtaining heavenly tribulation fluid again. He planned to make another attempt when he headed to the netherworld in future. Since the two realms were separated, then they each naturally had their own bosses. Now that the heaven and earth of the immortal realm had turned its back on him, he should still have a chance in the netherworld. There were already Saint Kings coming back from the nearest forbidden lands, bringing their clansmen to cultivate inside the great river mystery realm. Though the environment inside the celestial realm could possibly be like this as well, they had nothing else to do at the moment anyways, so what was the point of wasting time? However, Ling Han set out once more. He still had many old debts to clear off with certain forbidden lands. In the past, they had coveted the celestial king technique he possessed, and joined forces to attack him. He had only killed a single open clouds king, but did those that were left now think that they were spared because of that? Ling Han was not bloodthirsty, but he was not so generous that he could smile and consider the matter forgotten when others had bullied him. The first place he went to was the 8 Stones Forbidden Land. The 8 Stones Forbidden Land still had one Saint King, but he was not at the peak stage. However, even if he was a peak stage Saint King, he would not be a match for Ling Han. What was this kind of Saint King worth? Ling Han wasted all the cultivation levels of everyone in the 8 Stones Forbidden Land, and did not commit a massacre. In future they would still be able to develop. That would be with their own abilities, but judging by the look of things now, the link of karma between them and Ling Han could be considered to have been ended. However, Ling Han would naturally not forget about ransacking them. He obtained 3 pieces of saintly material, 12 saint tools, as well as 2 saintly medicines. Ling Han did not care whether it was saintly material or a saint tool. As long as it was made of level 17 godly metal, he would have the divine demon sword swallow it. Probably with all the forbidden lands added together, it would be enough to boost the divine demon sword to level 18. Next, he would be going to the celestial realm to increase its grade. However, with how bountiful the resources were in the celestial realm, this obviously would not be a problem. After leaving the 8 Stones Forbidden Land, Ling Han toured the forbidden lands one after another. There were more and more saintly materials and saintly medicines in his possession, and when he swept through the stock of the 13th Forbidden Land, the divine demon sword had finally advanced into level 18. Ling Han immediately handed all the level 18 godly metal in his possession to be swallowed by the divine demon sword, but if he wanted to boost the divine demon sword up to level 19, the amount of level 18 godly metal would have to be multiplied by 100-fold at the very least. This was completely impossible to do. Perhaps if he slowly searched for a few tens of thousands years in the ancient realm, he might be able to accomplish this mission. After clearing off all the old debts, Ling Han entered into the netherworld. He was going to bring the Overlord Sword Demon Master, the Hysteria Demon Master, Ouyang Taishan, and the others, and when the people from both sides were present, he was going to barge his way into the celestial realm. Chapter 1669, Breaking Open the Doors to the Celestial Realm. Ling Han entered into the netherworld from the nearest 2-realm battlefield, and after calculating the galactic coordinates, he unfurled a golden path, heading towards Sea-Space Planet. Coincidentally, he encountered an eternal river tear undergoing the heavenly tribulation on his way there. He immediately stepped on the brakes and halted, barging into the other's heavenly tribulation. That man was a young King Tear, and had advanced into the pinnacle level of the eternal river tier after cultivating for only 1 million years, which could be considered very shocking. When he saw Ling Han barge in, his face involuntarily turned green in shock. What on earth is going on? I am undergoing a heavenly tribulation. What do you mean by barging in? Do you want to kill me? Otherwise, who would take the risk of being pulled into the heavenly tribulation and barge in? But I don't even know you. As senior. When he saw that Ling Han was stepping on a golden path, he realized that this was a demon master. Whether he was a black demon or a heaven demon, he would be able to crush him easily with a single finger either way. Ling Han grinned and shot out a punch at the heavenly tribulation. Boom. What made him pleasantly surprised was the fact that the heavenly tribulation immediately reacted, forming new tribulation clouds. As expected, the 2 realms were separate, and even the wills of the heaven and earth were completely different. That eternal river tear almost bit his tongue. Was this senior an idiot? He took the initiative to trifle with the heavenly tribulation, and actually looked very pleased at that. Do you like to be struck by lightning so much? Even if you are a demon master, so what? You were strong, and the heavenly tribulation would only be even stronger. If you showed off too much, you would definitely be struck by lightning. But his face immediately twitched. He was so shocked that all the pores on his body were wide open. What had he seen? As multiple bolts of lightning took the form of giants, the aura that each of them exuded was strong enough to make him go into a breakdown, and their number was hair-raising. It was not just one or two but rather millions and millions of them, and that number was even increasing endlessly. Could any human undergo such a heavenly tribulation? Ling Han gave a battle cry, and charged into the tribulation clouds. Ping, 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 he crushed everything in his way, shattering one giant after another as he went. Fuck! That eternal river tear directly shouted what he thought. Because he was too stunned, he completely forgot that he was undergoing a heavenly tribulation, and was instantly struck by a lightning bolt, which caused him severe injury. Ling Han was invincible everywhere he went. He had merged the regulations of the two realms to reach this kind of cultivation level, and whether it was the netherworld or the immortal realm, his battle prowess did not decrease the slightest. He charged into the depths of the tribulation clouds, and easily obtained the heavenly tribulation fluid. Though I haven't drunk it, I am sure that this is slightly different than what I got in the immortal realm. The moment the heavenly tribulation fluid was taken, the tribulation clouds immediately dispersed. Ling Han stood proudly in the galaxy, and when he saw that the eternal river tear previously was in a critical situation, he lent him a helping hand, taking over for him for his heavenly tribulation, and once again charged into the tribulation clouds. In merely a short while, the heavenly tribulation dispersed once more. Thank you, Senior, for your help. That eternal river tear had been scared silly, thanking Ling Han with a trembling voice, though it was also because he had been stunned by Ling Han that he suffered a severe injury. Otherwise, with his natural talent and strength, he would definitely have had no problem undergoing a heavenly tribulation. He was also internally rueful. Everyone said that he was extraordinarily talented, but from today onwards he would not have any more arrogance. Just look at this person. That was what true awesome was like. Ling Han smiled at the person and unfurled the golden path, continuing his journey. It would take more than half a year to reach Sea-Space Planet from here, and Ling Han actually encountered two other people undergoing their heavenly tribulation on his way, which naturally allowed him to freeload off their heavenly tribulation another 2 times, giving him an additional 4 portions of heavenly tribulation fluid. Half a year later, Sea-Space Planet appeared in front of him again. The golden path spread over, and the Hysteria Demon Master immediately came out to receive him. He looked like he was completely guarded, right until he could see that the visitor was Ling Han. He was so stunned and gaped so widely that he could fit 2 eggs in his open mouth. Demon Master. Not only was he a demon master, he was an earth demon at that. This was too inconceivable. Over a dozen years ago when Ling Han left, he was only in the eternal river tier. Ling Han laughed loudly and reminisced with the Hysteria Demon Master, as well as explained the purpose of his visit. After that, he went to Cold Cloud's planet to inform the Overlord Sword Demon Master. He stayed here for a very short time, fearing that he would meet Zhu Xian, that infatuated girl. Finally, Ling Han informed Ouyang Taishan, telling him that he could bring people to gather here. He waited for 2 years' time and everyone finally gathered on Sea-Space Planet. The Overlord Sword Demon Master, the Hysteria Demon Master, and Ouyang Taishan brought all the people that they should bring through their respective spatial god tools, and set out with Ling Han. They entered into the immortal realm through the 2-realm passageway, and also came to the Great River Mystery Realm. This return trip took another 3 years' time. In this time, Ling Han had also obtained 20 portions of heavenly tribulation fluid in the netherworld, but this was the limit. After that, the heaven and earth of the netherworld behaved like the heaven and earth of the immortal realm. Once he interfered, the heavenly tribulation would immediately dissipate, not giving him another chance to obtain the heavenly tribulation fluid anymore. This naturally caused the 3 demon masters' faces to twitch, their eyes almost popping out in shock. This should be about it. I'll give everyone 1 more month and after that we enter into the celestial realm. Ling Han gathered the masses and announced the time for entering into the celestial realm. Those of the Forbidden Lands were both excited and terrified. They were finally able to return to their true homeland, but they were the ones that had been expelled in the past, and now that they returned once more to the celestial realm, would they be targeted? The young king tiers like Zi Qinfeng and the second in the world were filled with blazing fighting spirit. They could become leaders in the immortal realm, and were confident that they would also stay ahead of the masses even in the celestial realm. All of them could barely wait. The large black dog, the heavenly emperor of thunder and fire, the rabbit, and the old ginseng also returned. The rock golem chased after Ling Han all day like a dog. Little Qing meanwhile was very proud and crouched behind Ling Han. Occasionally she would stretch out her wings and peck him, astonishingly elegant. These guys had all been nurtured with Ling Han's full effort. They had even consumed saintly medicine before. Ling Han gave that natural psychic fruit to the Empress. He was sure that he could also advance rapidly even in the celestial realm, and did not need to depend on such celestial medicine to increase his cultivation level. If it would actually increase his power directly, Ling Han would not be reserved. A month later, the time to enter into the celestial realm had finally arrived. Everyone had long since entered into the spatial god tools. All the saints and demon masters had also entered themselves when they handed the spatial god tools over to Ling Han. Though Ling Han and the Empress were presently able to break open the doors to the celestial realm, they worried that if the two of them opened the doorway at the same time, they would enter from two completely different places. Thus, the Empress also handed this honor over to Ling Han, while she herself entered into the Black Tower. And now Ling Han was the only person left. At present, he had already arrived at a dark, cold area of the universe. He inhaled softly. After entering into the celestial realm, he would be able to see his parents, Sun, Hunyo, and the others. He had suppressed this thought at the bottom of his heart, yet now it was completely unleashed and this desire became incredibly powerful. I am coming. He laughed loudly, gathered his full strength, and began to tear a rip into space. The regulations of the two realms collided. He used his full effort, and suddenly multiple layers of space broke apart, revealing a dark, quiet cave entrance. Ling Han did not enter. The doors that connected to the celestial realm were not opened yet. If he barged in right now, he would only be stuck in an endless empty void. He continued the struggle, and after throwing over 1,000 punches, with sword chi slashing out endlessly, this cave entrance became wider and considerably deeper, and there was an obscure light that was gradually appearing. Like a mirror, he could see that another realm was appearing at the other end of the cave. The celestial realm was gradually becoming clearer in front of Ling Han's eyes. Chapter 1670. First arrived at the celestial realm. Ling Han did not hesitate any further, and entered with a single step. When he arrived in front of that mirror, he delivered the final strike. Crack! A crisp sound rang out, echoing through the whole heaven and earth, and alerting both the immortal realm and netherworld. This was the barrier between the ancient realm and the celestial realm. Only a great saint that had merged the regulations of both realms could manage to break through this barrier, and now it had shattered. The great doors to the celestial realm had officially opened. Boom, endless spiritual chi surged over, and that hole that he had pierced open was currently closing back up behind Ling Han. The heaven and earth had their own instinctive recovery ability, its speed astonishingly quick, approaching Ling Han swiftly, as well as stopping this large volume of spiritual chi from entering into the immortal realm. Ling Han's figure flashed and shot towards the celestial realm. Behind him, that passageway was swiftly closing up. He flew rapidly and suddenly appeared in the air. Behind him, a black hole opened up for a moment and quickly closed off. Ling Han stood in the air, while there was an indescribably expansive forest beneath him. Every tree was thousands of meters tall, and had leaves that were even larger than houses. Some had even bore fruit, which were incredibly and extraordinarily massive. The spiritual chi here was too plentiful, a good many times denser than even in the Great River Mystery Realm. Ling Han had just swept an eye over, and had already found at least 17 godly medicines that were above level 10, and the highest grade even reached up to level 15. But the scale over which his divine sense could spread over had also been greatly limited. Additionally, the height at which he could fly was also limited. The celestial realm was different from the ancient realm. This place was very big and a city here was like a great star. However, the whole celestial realm was an integral whole, and was only separated by an ocean into two mainlands, which were called the Eastern Celestial Realm and the Western Celestial Realm. There were also a few random small islands in the ocean. Of course, they were small only in relative terms to the two mainlands. In truth, any of the islands was shockingly as huge as a whole galaxy of the ancient realm. According to the heavenly emperor of thunder and fire, the ocean was very dangerous. In a moment of carelessness, one could easily encounter a severing mundane tier, dividing soul tier, or even immortal palace tier and ascending origin tier level immortal beasts. If they were the hot-tempered type, they would easily destroy the sea vessel along with everyone on board with a single move. Thus, crossing the ocean was a very risky matter. Ordinarily, only very large forces would establish marine routes, and charge their passengers an exorbitant fee. Flying across the ocean? That would only be delusional because the altitude that one could fly at was limited, and if they encountered powerful immortal beasts, the latter could easily swallow any person who was flying just by opening their mouths, which was similarly dangerous. Thankfully, Ling Han presently did not need to consider the problem of crossing the ocean. He did not even know where the rock palace was. The first step was to find his footing here. Ling Han released the Heavenly Emperor of Thunder and Fire, the large black dog, and the Empress from the Spatial God Tools and Black Tower, respectively. The Heavenly Emperor of Thunder and Fire had been an Immortal Palace tier elite in the first place, and the large black dog was also linked in countless ways with the Celestial Realm. "I've finally returned," the Heavenly Emperor of Thunder and Fire exclaimed ruefully. He had also become a young man in his 20s by now, and finally did not look so awkward. "Where is this place?" Ling Han asked. "With how big the Celestial Realm is, how should I know?" The Heavenly Emperor of Thunder and Fire rolled his eyes at him. "Putting me aside, even a great many celestial kings might not have traveled through every corner of the Celestial Realm. What more when there are a great many restricted areas that not even celestial kings may dare enter?" Ling Han sighed and replied, "If you don't know, just be frank about it. You don't have to come up with so many excuses." "That's right." The large black dog hit him while he was down. "Youngster, don't pretend you know if you're ignorant." The Heavenly Emperor of Thunder and Fire humphed. As his new body grew up, he had also become considerably more mature, no longer getting into a fight with the large black dog at the slightest provocation. "Let's go find a city first. We should not linger in this kind of primitive forest. With our present strength, we would be dead if we encountered any immortal beast. We would not even be able to flee. Additionally, we should not fly in the skies. That would make ourselves too big a target." Ling Han, the Empress, and the others all descended as he said. In this place, it was clear that the Heavenly Emperor of Thunder and Fire had the greatest right of speech. As for the large black dog, could his words be believed? In this kind of dense forest, Ling Han and his group were incredibly minuscule. Any single leaf that fell would be a great many times bigger than them. However, it was not every demonic beast in the Celestial Realm that was incredibly powerful. Ling Han also saw ordinary ants. Of course, they were considerably bigger than normal, and possessed strength at least on the level of Spiritual Ocean tier. In the Celestial Realm, this was what ordinary was like. According to the Heavenly Emperor of Thunder and Fire, most people would be in the Shattering Void tier upon birth, and the stronger their parents, the higher the starting point for the child that would be born out of such a union. It was rumored that the son of a celestial king could even be in the Severing Mundane tier upon birth. But any force that had the slightest bit of strength would disperse the infant's cultivation level before the child had been born, converting it into natural fertilizer to improve their natural talent. In the Celestial Realm, it was relatively very simple to cultivate to the Genesis tier, but it would be too difficult to further improve one's natural talent after that. Thus this was a wise choice. Furthermore, this was not something that could be easily done either. The clan had to have an ancestor that was at least in the Severing Mundane tier to be able to cast this kind of secret technique. Don't think that Severing Mundane ancestors were cheap in the Celestial Realm. It was exactly the opposite. As long as one had advanced into the Severing Mundane tier, they would be greatly valued by any force. However, since they had obtained an endless lifespan, what Severing Mundane ancestor would be willing to live relying on someone else's charity? In the Celestial Realm, the unit of measure for forces would be cities. A Celestial King-level force could even possess cities that numbered in the hundreds of millions, and every city was comparable to a great star, which showed how strong a force was. Even the smallest one-star city would have a Severing Mundane tier overseer. Otherwise, it could not be called a city and could only be called a gathering spot. Ling Han's group traveled in the forest. They did not have any goal and were only heading in a fixed direction. In the Celestial Realm, there was no difference between day and night. Though there were also stars scattered across the skies, they were like small worlds, and were not real stars but rather massive asteroids. From a certain aspect, this was not much different from a small world, though the space was larger, and the regulations were of an even higher level. Thus, they could only use the time that had passed to calculate how many days had passed. After about 10 days, they had finally walked out of this massive forest. A large river appeared ahead of them. It was incredibly wide as 1,000 miles, and meandered for very far, without any end in sight. There's a ship. And behind them, there was presently a large ship that was riding the waves. This ship was astonishingly huge, as long as 3,000 meters and just as wide. But traveling in this great river, it did not look remarkable at all, and would not have any difficulty in turning because of its humongous size either. It was moving at a very rapid speed and soon surpassed them, heading forwards. In the celestial realm, the limits of speed had been released. Even a ship could match the speed of Ling Han running at full speed. Now it's easy. We can just follow the river and we will definitely find a city on the way, the Heavenly Emperor of Thunder and Fire said. They would not be able to board this passing ship, but at least they knew that they would definitely come across a city as long as they followed the river course, which also set their minds at ease. However, they might come across a city even faster if they were to go in the opposite direction. They gave it some thought but still decided to head forwards. Another month later, they finally saw a large city appear before them. It was so big that its boundaries could not be seen. They could only see that this great river was on the left side of the city, and there were at least a few hundred ships that were docked there. Chapter 1671. It's really so coincidental. That was a waterway, they could not enter into the city through here. The Empress wore a face veil. She was too beautiful, and with their present strength they were still too weak in the celestial realm. If she became targeted by a profligate young master of any clan, there would be great trouble. Of course, they should avoid using the Black Tower as much as possible. This was the celestial realm. Perhaps severing mundane tears or dividing soul tears could see through the secret of the Black Tower. They circled around the city for at least half a day, and only then did they find a main road which led to the city. This was really a major route, being indescribably wide. Really, it was not inferior to that great river at all, and extended to the city. They could see that the city gateway was also similarly wide. Was this really a gateway into the city? It was practically an insurmountable barrier. However, the city gates were presently closed, while there was a small door that was open at its side which was guarded by soldiers. Even if it was a small door, it was about 300 meters wide and 3,000 meters tall, and looked incredibly majestic and grand. The Heavenly Emperor of Thunder and Fire gestured for them to stop and said, "If we want to enter into the city we have to pay a fee, ordinarily star stones which are refined from those asteroids in the skies that have fallen. They contain the great Tao of the heaven and earth. Otherwise we can only use saintly medicine." Ling Han and the Empress exchanged a look, both feeling rueful. Entry into the city required a fee of saintly medicine. This was practically daylight robbery. Spatial god tools are too common here. It would not deceive anyone if we were to hide them, and if we bring them into the city like that, it would be seen as deliberately breaching the city laws. By then there would definitely be elites mobilized to suppress us, the Heavenly Emperor of Thunder and Fire said. Ling Han nodded. Then we can only release the others somewhere nearby. They retreated more than 10,000 miles away. Because it was near the city, there weren't any overly fierce demonic beasts, and immortal beasts were even more impossible. The Blue Feather Saint, Ouyang Taishan, Star Sand Saint, and the others all appeared. Ling Han explained the circumstances to them, and the saints all nodded. This was the celestial realm, where spiritual qi was not only denser, the regulations of the two realms were also complete. As long as there was enough time, these saints would have hopes of becoming severing mundane ancestors. They were able to cultivate to the saint tier in the ancient realm, which proved that all of them were extraordinarily gifted, so there was definitely hope for them to advance into the severing mundane tier. They would stay here first whilst looking for saintly medicine nearby, and gradually send their people into the city in future. Ling Han was already extremely benevolent to have brought them here. With the warning of the Heavenly Emperor of Thunder and Fire, everyone prepared the same statement. They were all natives of the celestial realm, and had been living in the celestial realm since childhood. They did not have any relation to the ancient realm at all. Otherwise, if the secret was leaked out, they would all be hunted down and executed. Hence, the first thing on the agenda was to merge the regulations of the two realms. If they were unable to do this, they would not need to enter into the city. If they were discovered, it would be equivalent to confessing that they had come from the ancient realm. After they were settled, Ling Han and his group entered the city. Ling Han could still afford 4 saintly medicines. If it was not for the fact that the Heavenly Emperor of Thunder and Fire and the large black dog did not know of the existence of the Black Tower, Ling Han really wanted to draw the Empress into the Black Tower as well. In that manner he would have been able to save 1 saintly medicine. Halt! When they arrived at the small city gateway, they were stopped by 2 guards. These 2 were actually Eternal River tier elites. There were a total of 16 guards, and all of them were in this cultivation level, showing how high the overall level of cultivation of the celestial realm was. However, the heavenly Emperor of Thunder and Fire immediately curled his lip and communicated a message through divine sense. This should be a 1-star city or a 2-star city at most. Otherwise, it would be absolutely impossible for only a few eternal river tiers to be guarding the gates. He added further that if it was a 5-star city which had a celestial king overseer, though the guards were only Genesis tiers, there would definitely be 1 or 2 severing mundane tier inspectors in the vicinity. Entrance fee. One of the guards stretched out his hand. Ling Han bore with the heartache. Usually it was only he who would be robbing others, yet now he had to bear with being robbed, which depressed him greatly. He handed over 4 saintly medicines. Thankfully they were only level 17, which could be considered some comfort. Go in then. That guard waved them off. When they passed through the city gates, a ray of light shot down and swept over their bodies. This was to inspect for any spatial god tools. It was not only to prevent the emergence of stowaways, if any opposing force snuck in a large number of elites via a spatial god tool, and suddenly attacked from within, that would become a huge problem. After the 4 of them entered into the city, the heavenly Emperor of Thunder and Fire immediately planned to make himself scarce. Brat, then we will go our separate ways from now on. I want to go and concentrate on cultivation, make a comeback, and then kill all those bastards that had hunted me. He left confidently after saying these words. Then Grandpa Dog is also going to go free, but don't worry, little Han. I have already remembered your scent, and even if you die and are buried in a grave, I will still be able to find you. The large black dog's words were much more annoying. Just get lost. Ling Han shot out a foot, and the large black dog immediately raced off with his rear swaying behind him, incredibly showy. It was good that they had left. Now it was just him and the Empress left. Of course, there was still a large group of people in the Black Tower. This was called a city, but its size was comparable to a planet. Thus, there were tall mountains that were enshrouded in clouds, ceaselessly surging rivers, blazing deserts and icy plains here. All kinds of environments existed here. There were innumerable passers-by on the streets, and not one of them cast a second glance on Ling Han and the Empress. Ling Han suddenly had the misconception that they were already citizens of the celestial realm. He walked slowly with the Empress whilst listening in on the conversations of the passers-by. This was their first time here, and neither of them had any experience with this realm, so they naturally had to make more observations and speak less. Actually, the people of the celestial realm were not much different. Aside from the fact that the overall level of cultivation was higher, being here did not make them feel like they were in a different place from the ancient realm. Ling Han and the Empress listened in on the discussions of others on the way, and the most common topic of conversation was that the Dark Blue Moon Army was presently recruiting in preparation for military service. Ling Han's expression involuntarily became strange. Dark Moon Army? Could it be that this was Dark Moon City? The Dark Moon City, the Ding clan that Ding Zizhen and Ding Yaolong belonged to? It couldn't be so coincidental, right? Yet it was really so coincidental. There were a total of 3 great severing mundane tier forces in Dark Moon City, and the Ding clan was precisely one of them. However, though the Dark Moon Army was under the unified administration of these 3 great severing mundane tier forces, the true ownership of it did not belong to these 3 great forces. Why? In the celestial realm, all smaller forces needed to find a backer. Severing mundane tiers would look for dividing soul tiers, while dividing soul tiers would seek immortal palace tiers, and when one had reached immortal palace tier, they would be able to establish their own rule in the celestial realm, and did not need to look for other backers at all. Of course, if they wanted to, they could. For example, under the barrier of celestial king tier forces, there would definitely be ascending origin tier and immortal palace tier elites. Dark Moon City was a 1-star city, belonging to the lowest rank. Their backer was a dividing soul tier force, Black Moon Sect. The Black Moon Sect's backer was the Fu clan. Thus, this Dark Moon Army theoretically belonged to the Fu clan. However, there were thousands of cities under the rule of the Fu clan, so they naturally would not supervise all matters regardless of their importance. Hence, the Dark Moon Army was still controlled by the 3 great clans in reality. However, after joining the Dark Moon Army, as long as one showed outstanding performance, he would have a chance of being promoted and joining the army of a 4-star great city, and if that was continued by further stunning performance, he would be able to enter into a 3-star great city and enter into the line of sight of the Fu clan. In the celestial realm, becoming a severing mundane ancestor would mean an endless lifespan, but why were there so few dividing soul tier and immortal palace tier elites? Firstly, high-grade celestial techniques were rare, and secondly, it was the problem of resources. This was not a problem that could be solved through simply living a few more billion years. Hence, if one could join a great sect or great clan, that was the fastest shortcut for lower-class cultivators to rise above the rest. And there was such an opportunity in front of them now. The Dark Moon Army was recruiting reserve troops. There would only be such a chance every 100 years, and if they missed it, they would have to wait another 100 years. Ling Han looked at the Empress, and the Empress nodded. They needed a chance to integrate themselves into the celestial realm, and this Dark Moon Army was their best option. Chapter 1672, Enlisting. Ling Han and the Empress journeyed towards the western part of Dark Moon City. This city was too colossal, being comparable to a great star. They could claim to have traveled over land and water, and only arrive at their destination a day later. This was a range of hills, and an empty space had been cleared at the base. They could clearly feel that there was a protective formation, and the might that it unleashed should be capable of insta-killing Genesis tiers, reaching the level of the severing Mundane tier. There were a great many people here. Clearly, joining the Dark Moon Army was a wonderful opportunity for one to excel, and anyone with the slightest bit of ambition would not want to miss it. Thus, there were crowds of people, and they could see people in all directions they looked. It was not just limited to pure humans either. There were also half-humans, and they occupied a great proportion of the crowd. Among the many races, the human race had the highest tolerance level, so even if a great many humans looked purely human, there was actually the bloodline of demonic beasts flowing in their bodies. There was a very long line at the registration area, and Ling Han and the Empress also lined up obediently behind the masses. In the ancient realm, they were already strong enough to conquer all opposition, but in this place, Genesis tier was really not enough. As they lined up, the two of them also listened to the idle conversations of others to increase their knowledge of the celestial realm. However, the most common topic was the recruitment. This time, the Dark Moon Army would recruit a total of 1,000 people to become their reserve troops. These 1,000 people would be divided into 10 teams with 100 per team. Then, in the next 90 years from now onwards, one person would be knocked out every single year. Finally, every team would be left with 10 people, totaling up to 100 people who would truly become members of the Dark Moon Army to replenish the wear and tear of the Dark Moon Army. The Celestial Realm was a place that was filled with battles. Though the Dark Moon City had a backer and it was rare for large-scale battles to take place, this was not a lone city. It needed to do business with other cities, and this concerned the problem of transport. Between any two cities, there would definitely be mountain bandits, and the task of the Dark Moon Army was to regularly purge some mountain bandits. Otherwise, if the bandits were too rampant, not only would it affect the reputation of the Dark Moon City, it would also damage their direct profits. However, those that would become mountain bandits were basically below the severing Mundane tier, and the severing Mundane ancestors of the Dark Moon City were too lazy to even bother wasting time to search for these mountain bandits because they were like weeds. If one batch was eliminated, a new one would pop up. There would always be people taking risks and wanting to reap profits without working for it. Hence, the task of suppressing the thieves was handed over to the Dark Moon Army. Sometimes they would also be hired by traveling merchants as protection, and earn some extra income on the side. All things considered, after one joined the Dark Moon Army, he would be able to obtain a regular amount of cultivation resources, and those that accomplished military merits would even get celestial techniques. Sometimes they would also have extra gains. Aside from the fact that it was more dangerous, it really did not have any disadvantages. Added with the fact that one could also be promoted and finally enter into the Fu clan, the masses would naturally scramble for the opportunity. The progress of the troop was very slow. A few hours had passed and Ling Han and the Empress had only advanced half the way forwards. Because the two of them had come very late, they were the final two, and there was no one else lining up behind them. It was at this moment that a young man flew over from the distance, ADN directly charged to the registration area. He was clearly cutting the line here, but the people at the registration area actually did not chase him off, but rather helped him register politely. This incited fury from the crowd and a great many people jumped up. What gives him the right? That's right. We are all honestly lining up here. Why is he allowed to cut in? This is unjust. However, someone immediately poured cold water on them and asked, "You guys don't even know who that is." Who? That person shook his head, looking at them like they were idiots. That is a prodigy of the younger generation of the Ding clan, Ding Xiaochen. This whole Dark Moon Army is theirs, so what if he cut into the line? With these words, everyone lost their anger, but there was also someone mumbling under their breath. This is not the Ding clans. It belongs to the Fu clan. Even if it was not the Fu clan, there is still the Black Moon sect and there are also two other great clans. Ding Xiaochen is a prodigy with astonishing natural talent in cultivation. It is said that he has formed over 600 million stars when he was in the Eternal River tier, and now that he is a Saint King who could be a match for him among his peers. I initially had thought of aiming for the position of team captain, but from the look of things now the pressure has increased considerably. There is one less position available out of the 10 positions. Strange, Ding Xiaochen still needs to join the Dark Moon army to earn military credits? What cultivation resources would he even lack? Ho, perhaps he has come here to show off. Wrong. A person wagged his finger, pretending to be mysterious. Seeing the people around him look in his direction, he smiled proudly and said, "That is because there is another person that would be coming here today, and Ding Xiaochen has come for that person." "Who is it?" Everyone pressed the question. "You guys will know later," the person answered, feigning mysteriousness. At this time, a commotion was suddenly heard from ahead of them. "What is it?" Those behind were not clear about the situation, and did not dare extend their divine sense to find out either. There was a severing mundane tier elite overseeing things here. Who would dare release their divine sense in front of such an elite and challenge his authority? Ding Xiaochen actually has 3-star aptitude. Very quickly, someone who was in front informed them of the situation. What? Everyone was shocked. In the celestial realm, there was a different kind of method to estimate the natural talent of cultivators. Basically, it was to calculate the tier-surpassing battle prowess of a cultivator, but there was also potential of growth and so on, which was not completely identical with the ancient realm. Ordinarily, 1-star aptitude would be worthy of nurturing, 2-star aptitude could be considered a prodigy, and 3 stars would be a prodigy among prodigies. As expected of a young king tier from the Ding clan, this was too amazing. So this is a disciple that has been nurtured by the 3 great clans? Someone asked softly with a trembling voice. Before this, there were indeed a few top talents, but they only had 2-star aptitude. Most people would only have 1-star aptitude. Everyone shook their heads. This gap was really too wide, so wide that they did not even have the heart to feel envious. They could only admire such talent from afar. It was at this moment that another figure shot over from the distance. Dressed in dazzlingly crimson robes, it was a young girl as beautiful as a fairy, a lovely young woman with a snow-white complexion, while her hair was as black as ink, forming a powerful juxtaposition. She looked extremely enchanting. That is Mao Shuyu, the only daughter of Great Commander Mao Dai of the Dark Moon Army. His Great Commander Mao Dai? That is a 3rd Severance Grand Elder. Lord Mao is a living legend. In the past, he came all alone to Dark Moon City. Who would have thought that he could have become a 3rd Severance Grand Elder in 3 eras? I get it. Ding Xiaochen has come for the sake of Mao Shuyu. Lord Mao is the only severing mundane tier in Dark Moon City that does not belong to any of the 3 great clans, and a 3rd Severance at that. With his freakish talent, becoming a 4th Severance consummate level would definitely be no issue. By then, it is highly possibly that he would be directly transferred over by the Fu clan, and a meteoric career success is just round the corner. Thus, the 3 great clans must all want to maintain good relations with him. Even if he continues to stay in Dark Moon City, a 3rd Severance Grand Elder is still a top-tier elite, and is worth them fighting over him at all costs. Furthermore, isn't marrying his daughter the least expensive and safest method? If I could marry her, that'd be great. As everyone discussed spiritedly, the young woman in red did not take advantage of her superior status to cut into the line like Ding Xiaochen had. Instead, she obediently joined the end of the line, which just happened to be right behind Ling Han and the Empress. Chapter 1673, 3.5 stars aptitude. Ding Xiaochen immediately walked over from the front, his expression filled with arrogance, as if there was no one important enough to garner his attention. However, when he arrived in front of Mao Shuyu, he immediately cracked a smile and said, "Shuyu, why do you have to line up with these lowly commoners? Come, I will bring you to the front." Ding Xiaochen, who allowed you to directly address me by name? Mao Shuyu did not appreciate his offer at all. You can either call me Miss Mao or call me Mao Shuyu. Ding Xiaochen looked slightly embarrassed after getting the cold shoulder from her. His eyes swept over, and when he spotted Ling Han and the Empress, he involuntarily took out his anger on them and shouted, What are you two looking at? Ling Han was not the type that was willing to be bullied. He was just about to speak when he saw Mao Shuyu stretch out a hand in front of him. She asked, "What are you being so fierce to others for?" Ding Xiaochen's eyes were dark, and he glared fiercely at Ling Han because the Empress was a woman after all. He smirked internally. When they went through the selection process, he would definitely target and kill this guy. He humphed and strode off. "This guy is very petty and will definitely target the two of you," Mao Shuyu said to Ling Han and the Empress. "Don't worry. With me there, he will not dare do anything to the two of you. When the selection process begins later, the two of you just stay beside me and I will ensure your safety." She was really quite confident. Ling Han involuntarily laughed and replied, "Then thank you." He made his decision. Later, if he was to encounter Ding Xiaochen, he would definitely let him know the true depth of his abilities. The Empress, meanwhile, didn't even pay him any regard. Her life philosophy was very simple. If anything made her unhappy, just kill it. The line slowly advanced and a few prodigies would occasionally appear, which would stun the masses. However, in the celestial realm, this city was really too small. It was really difficult for such freakish prodigies like Ling Han, the Empress, and the Rain Emperor to appear. Lastly, it was finally Ling Han and the Empress's turn, followed by Mao Shuyu, and there was no one else after. The Empress went first. This was the first test. According to the rules, only those who had reached the Eternal River tier would be qualified to register, while the highest limit was Genesis tier. Severing Mundane tier? If there were any Severing Mundane tiers that were willing to join the Dark Moon Army, then even Great Commander Mao Dai would gladly come out to receive them instead. What need was there for one to have to come here to register? The test was very simple. There was only a stone, but there was a formation inscribed on it. One only had to deliver a full power strike against it, and it would reflect the candidate's cultivation level and aptitude. The main deciding factor was battle prowess. Aside from that, the quality of their origin power and unique cultivation techniques would also be recorded by the formation, analyzed, integrated, and graded. This could be considered to be quite accurate. The Empress stretched out a slender hand as fair as snow, her fingers long and slender like spring onions. Even if she had concealed her appearance and changed into loose robes, hiding her perfect figure, a great many people were still besotted when they saw her unadorned hand. This was a great beauty and bewitching demoness that could conquer the whole world with her charms. Under the attention of innumerable pairs of eyes, the Empress pressed lightly on the testing stone. Suddenly, the testing stone released a white halo which swiftly disappeared. Soon after, a slim line appeared on the left and right of the testing stone. That was two pillars of light, one red and the other purple. The red ray of light was only half as high as the purple one. High extreme of the Genesis tier, 2.5 stars aptitude. The examiner raised his head to look at the Empress, showing an expression of shock. This was an astonishing natural talent that was inferior only to Ding Xiaochen's. However, the Empress was not the only prodigy of this grade, but she definitely could be ranked among the top 10. This red line represented cultivation level, while the purple line represented aptitude, which was closely connected with battle prowess. If the purple line exceeded the red line, it meant that the candidate possessed tier-surpassing battle prowess, and the more it exceeded it, the higher his tier-surpassing battle prowess. Of course, the majority of people here had two lines of equal height, while a very small number of people had red lines that exceeded their purple lines. This would mean immediate elimination. The Dark Moon Army did not need trash, not even for their reserve troops. They would only show 2-star aptitude. This was the conclusion that she and Ling Han had come to after discussion. They did not want to attract too much attention. Their knowledge of the Celestial Realm and Dark Moon City was truly too limited. However, the Empress had not undergone such a test before, so in a moment of carelessness, her grade showed 2.5 stars. Passed, your serial number is 5572. The examiner registered the Empress and gave her a plaque. Without having been officially recruited, they would not even bother to record the actual names of the candidates. The Empress took the plaque and still did not speak. She only stepped back a bit and waited for Ling Han. Ling Han smiled at Mao Shuyu and said, "Miss Mao, you can go first." As a man he was still quite gentlemanly. He would just be the last to take his turn. Mao Shuyu did not refuse his kind offer and walked forwards. After concentrating slightly, she struck a heavy blow on the testing stone. White light surged and immediately disappeared. The red and purple line appeared once more. Consummate level of the Genesis tier, 3-star aptitude. the examiner exclaimed in shock. Finally, another super genius had appeared, not allowing Ding Xiaochen to be the only excellent one there. However, this was very normal. One was a prodigy from the Ding clan, while the other was the only daughter of the great commander. From birth, they were already at a higher level than others, so wasn't it absolutely normal for them to be far ahead in the lead? Miss Mao, your serial number is 5573. The examiner even stood up deliberately to hand over the plaque to Mao Shuyu. It couldn't be helped. Her old man was the superior of his superior. How could he not be extra polite? Mao Shuyu was very energetic. She was about to leave after taking the plaque, but she had just taken 2 steps when she stopped and turned to look at Ling Han. Clearly Ling Han had allowed her to be tested first, so she too wanted to give Ling Han some face. At least she would watch as he completed his test. Furthermore, she still remembered her promise to protect Ling Han and his companion. In the distance, Ding Xiaochen crossed his arms over his chest, a smug look on his face. At first, Ling Han had planned to keep a low profile, but when he saw this expression on Ding Xiaochen's face, he couldn't help but feel angered. He also looked back at Ding Xiaochen and tapped a finger on the testing stone. Xiao, a flash of sword light swept out, and the testing stone suddenly surged with white light. Then the red and purple lines appeared. High extreme of the Genesis tier, 3.5 stars aptitude. The examiner looked at the testing stone, bearing the expression of an idiot. Had this thing broken down? 3.5 stars? This had to be a joke. What? Ding Xiaochen too could no longer maintain his calm bearing. He immediately leaped over. He looked at the testing stone, his face slightly green. He had actually been surpassed by another. A 3.5 stars prodigy had actually appeared here. The last time a 3.5 stars prodigy appeared, it was still 3 years ago when Mao Dai showed his outstanding talent, and before that it was the strongest prodigy of the Ding clan, Ding Yaolong. Such prodigies were all capable of becoming 4th Severance consummate level in the end, without exception. One era was 100 million years. There were really too many people with long lives in the celestial realm. The usual way of recording by years was too inconvenient, and additionally, one epoch would be 12 trillion years. There were not many elites that could live that long though, because there was still the immortals' tribulation. If one could not continue becoming stronger, there would ultimately come a day when even celestial kings would die. Once one had advanced into the severing mundane tier, one could gain an unlimited lifespan, but why was it that most elites had all ultimately died at the first severance because of their immortals' tribulation through these countless eras? It was too hard to break through. Everyone said that there were 9 levels for celestial king tier, and reaching each level was as difficult as ascending the heavens, but how was it not the same for the severing mundane tier and ascending origin tier? The severing mundane tier meant striking oneself with the heavens will saber. If one was the slightest bit careless, what would be severed would not be one's mortal bonds, but his fruits of cultivation. Chapter 1674, Selection. Ordinarily, 1-star aptitude would have hope of becoming a 1st Severance Grand Elder, 2-star aptitude would become 2nd Severance, and 3.5 stars would be qualified to aim for 4th Severance. Of course, all of this was theory. However, there was one fact that could be confirmed. 3.5 stars aptitude might not be able to become 4th Severance, but those that could become 4th Severance would need to have at least 3.5 stars aptitude. Gasp. Ding Xiaochen looked at Ling Han jealously. This was too inconceivable. A lowly commoner actually had 3.5 stars aptitude. Even he would only be able to become a 3rd Severance Grand Elder at most. Though aptitude was not unchangeable, if one had cultivated a different cultivation technique or consumed some super celestial medicine, it was completely possible that aptitude could be increased or decreased, but how could it possibly be changed without a unique opportunity? If he had known that Ling Han and the Empress had only taken the test very casually, and their true potential surpassed 3.5 stars, just what kind of expression would he have on his face? Passed, your serial number is 5574. The examiner stood up again and handed the plaque to Ling Han. Perhaps Ling Han would be another Mao Dai, after many years, and become a new legend. What is your name and where do you come from? Mao Shiyu's eyes shone as she looked Ling Han up and down. Ling Han smiled slightly and replied, My name is Ling Han. I have just entered into Dark Moon City. Previously, I have been residing in a mountain forest, right until a beast stampede exploded not too long ago. Many of the residents of our village either died or moved elsewhere, so we came to Dark Moon City to seek refuge. This was the explanation that he, the Empress, the heavenly Emperor of Thunder and Fire, and the large black dog had agreed upon. Ling Han. Ding Xiaochen also walked over. He looked down proudly on Ling Han. I will give you a wonderful opportunity to become my follower. Don't think that this is an insult to you. In truth, who knows how many prodigies and elites want to become my followers, but were not given this chance at all. He naturally was not planning to support Ling Han, but simply wanted to have this super genius by his side so he could simply think of a method to get him killed in future. The top prodigy of Dark Moon City? It was enough for him alone to bear such a title. There was no need for another to share the title for him. What more surpass him? I am not interested. Ling Han naturally refused. Ding Xiaochen's expression darkened and he threatened, Brat, don't be ungrateful. Ho ho. Ling Han was too lazy to even respond to him this time and only laughed. Ignore him. Mao Shiyu scoffed and said, Ding Xiaochen, let me warn you not to mess around. I plan to introduce this person to Father, and see if he has any interest in taking a disciple. If you have any ideas that you shouldn't have, then even if you are a member of the Ding clan, Father will still dare to behead you. Ding Xiaochen's fingers involuntarily moved slightly. This was a sign that he was extremely furious. He stared at Ling Han for a while, a cold smirk appearing on his lips. He was merely in the high extreme, so even if he had 3.5 stars aptitude, so what? He had the advantage of more than a whole minor level. Wouldn't that be enough to compensate for that gap of half a star of aptitude? It was inevitable for the glint of cold steel to emerge in the subsequent selection. So what if he beat him to death then? Rules would be rules. He did not speak further, but the killing intent in his eyes could not be any more obvious. Ling Han was displeased internally, and thought that it would be great if he could also borrow the name of the Rock Palace. He could simply kill a hateful guy like this, and would not have to worry about retaliation from the force behind him. However, he had promised Huyu that he would raise the Ding clan to the ground. At first, he was not the type to bring disaster to others. No matter how notorious a clan was, there would still be a few good people and innocents among its members. Yet now his attitude became firm. Whether your Ding clan had any good people or not, he was determined to destroy it. Those who have received a place may advance and begin the next selection. A middle-aged man dressed in military attire appeared. He was a peak stage Saint King, and could be called a supreme elite in the ancient realm, yet was only an ordinary military officer here. And this was still because Dark Moon City was a 1-star city. If this was a 2-star or 3-star city, he might only be able to become a foot soldier of the lowest rank. More than 5,000 people walked forwards and arrived at the foot of the mountains. The military officer took one step forwards and said, To those who have passed through the selection today, I will be your military instructor for the next 100 years. I do not care who you are. Now that you are here and have fallen under my supervision, you all are just soldiers, understand? Understood. More than 5,000 people all shouted loudly. Additionally, my name is Tu Kong. You all may address me as instructor too, the military officer continued. And now, let me announce the rules of the selection. Setting out from here, you will have to climb 9 mountains. There are many blood shadow wolves there, and their strength ranges from the Eternal River tier to Genesis tier. What you all have to do is to bring the tail of a single blood shadow wolf back. He paused and then repeated, Only the first 1,000 people that bring back the tail of a blood shadow wolf will be qualified to become reserve troops of the Dark Moon Army. As for the others, I do not care what the reason is, all of you will be eliminated. In this period of time, all of you are responsible for your own lives. If you fear death, you can scram now. Actually, everyone knew these rules already. For some, this was not their first time undergoing this test, but there were some first-timers who were starting to hesitate. At first, they had thought that they could be fearless, but now that they had reached this step, they were still afraid. Over 300 people chose to give up, but those remaining still exceeded 5,000, so the elimination rate was going to be very high. Then, set out. Tu Kong snapped his fingers and then sat down. Boom, more than 5,000 people immediately charged out. Strength was not the only factor in the selection, there was also the factor of luck. For example, though Eternal River tiers could not possibly be a match for Genesis tiers, if they were lucky and encountered an Eternal River tier Blood Shadow Wolf, they would still have a chance of becoming one of the first 1,000 people. Follow me. Mao Shiyu was very trustworthy and beckoned Ling Han and the Empress over. Ling Han and the Empress didn't mind and followed her. The three of them used their respective movement techniques and traversed through the mountain forests. In the ancient realm, The speed of saints was about the same aside from those Genesis tiers that focused on cultivating regulations of time, who could have an advantage in speed. However, in the celestial realm, the speed of Genesis tiers varied. That was because the regulations of the celestial realm were more complete, and the structure of the heaven and earth here was incredibly sturdy. If one wanted to possess high speed, he would have to overcome various obstacles, and this led to the speed of Genesis tiers varying. Saint Kings were definitely faster than Great Saints, and Great Saints were definitely faster than Medium Saints. Of course, this did not apply to two such freaks like Ling Han and the Empress. Mao Shuyu did not know this fact, so she took the initiative to slow down. She was worried that if she went full speed ahead, Ling Han and the Empress would lose track of her. However, this kind of speed was already fast enough. After all, there were only over 300 Saint Kings that participated this time round. In the selection round, 1,000 candidates was enough. Those who performed better would just have to stand up earlier in the battle for the position of team captain, and this did not matter at all to her. With enough strength, what did she have to fear? Ding Xiaochen meanwhile followed behind them, looking like an eagle that was hunting its prey. Once Mao Shuyu had the slightest moment of carelessness, he would release a swift strike and deal with Ling Han. If Mao Shuyu had not been present, Ling Han actually would have been very happy to lead Ding Xiaochen to a remote place and deal with this bastard, but he could not kill Mao Shuyu too to keep her from leaking the secret, right? He gave Ding Xiaochen the middle finger and mouthed a curse word at him. Having been around the large black dog and the others for so long, if Ling Han was determined to anger someone, he really had a lot of methods at his disposal. Holy fuck. Ding Xiaochen's face involuntarily darkened. He swore that if Ling Han were to fall into his hands, he would definitely make his death an agonizing one. Chapter 1675, Revered by the Wolf Pack. More than 5,000 people diving into the mountain forest was akin to pouring a bucket of water into the ocean, completely negligible. What more when every single person still had to keep their guard up around others, so they naturally wanted nothing more than for other people to be as far away from them as possible. Soon, Ding Xiaochen was the only person left behind Ling Han and his group, but after a while, this guy also disappeared without a trace. Clearly he had definitely not given up, but was rather lying in ambush secretly, wanting to grasp an opening for a sneak attack. Ling Han grinned and asked, "Can we run faster?" Mao Shuyu was surprised. In her eyes, this was already the maximum speed a great saint could reach. She had even wanted to ask Ling Han and her companion if they should go slower. After all, even great saints could not possibly maintain this kind of maximum speed constantly. Yet Ling Han actually asked her if they could go faster. Was he being boastful? Mao Shuyu was not a gentle princess. Her personality was a fiery one. She did not say a word, but her speed increased slightly. After a while of running, she turned around wanting to see where Ling Han and his companion had fallen behind, but she got a shock when she turned her head because Ling Han and the Empress were both closely following behind her, only about 9 meters away. TTD this. Mao Shuyu was really shocked. Though she knew that these two had extraordinary aptitude, one having 2.5 stars, and the other having 3.5, there was still a gap of more than a whole minor level. How could these two possibly manage to follow her? Are you both monsters? She was dissatisfied and slowly increased her speed further, but she astonishingly discovered that Ling Han and the Empress were both following her with ease, still maintaining the gap of 9 meters, which did not increase or decrease. Where are your limits? Mao Shuyu finally gave her full effort and increased her speed to the maximum. Suddenly, it was as if she had turned into a gale. However, she soon discovered that she was still unable to throw Ling Han and the Empress off her tail. No, she was even unable to force the two of them to show the maximum level of their speed because the two of them were still maintaining a distance of 9 meters from her, but who could really say that this was their fastest speed? Actually, Mao Shuyu could still increase her speed slightly, but that was with a secret technique, and she could only use it for a temporary burst of speed which would be meaningless. Xiao, the three of them sped quickly. Behind them, Ding Xiaochen was running madly, but the distance between him and Ling Han's group was gradually widening, and he had finally completely lost track of all three of them. Even in Dark Moon City, it was not peaceful everywhere. There were some demonic beasts that had violent nature here. They clearly had gained intelligence, yet still had a fondness for devouring cultivators. Thus, they naturally were excluded from the cultivation civilization, and were on the opposing side of cultivators. These violent and bloodthirsty demonic beasts lived in such tall mountains, and were not completely exterminated, because they could be used to test cultivators such as presently. Occasionally birds would be scared into flight out of the forest and cries would ring out. Sometimes it would be a cultivator being killed, and sometimes it would be the demonic beast that would have the tables turned on it being killed instead. For enemies to meet on a narrow path, it was naturally the stronger side who would emerge victorious. Though they only had to run over 9 mountains, the terrain inside the mountain forest was complex, and it was very unsuitable for full-speed running. Hence, they spent a whole day's time to finally arrive at the 9th mountain. And there were blood shadow wolves here. Be careful. Blood shadow wolves are demonic beasts that live in packs. Ordinarily, a pack of blood shadow wolves would have a single wolf king, 4 to 10 guards, as well as a few dozen to over 100 common wolves. The wolf king and guard wolves would definitely be at the peak of the consummate level of the Genesis tier, and the wolf king would be an astonishing big shot, and can be claimed to be a big shot among Genesis tiers, Mao Shuyu explained to Ling Han and the Empress. Ling Han and the Empress nodded their heads. Though they did not take these wolves seriously, they did not mind listening to her explanation. Anyways, we can complete our mission as long as we have the tail of a blood shadow wolf. There is no need for us to charge into a wolf's den, we only have to find one that is all alone, Mao Shuyu continued. Fine then. Ling Han nodded with a smile. However, their luck was very bad. Though they soon discovered a wolf's den, there were as many as 100 members in this wolf pack, with no less than 30 at the consummate level of the Genesis tier, and the Wolf King was even more frightening. Ling Han was absolutely sure that even the Blue Feather Saint King and Ouyang Taishan could not possibly be a match for this Wolf King. Firstly, it was because of the regulations, and secondly, this Wolf King indeed had very strong battle prowess, suppressing all other demon wolves. We'll wait here, and there would definitely be a blood shadow wolf that falls behind the pack. Even someone with a personality like Mao Shuyu's did not dare carelessly provoke these blood shadow wolves. Ling Han's eyes swept over, and his eyes involuntarily lit up as he exclaimed, "Wife, look!" He pointed at the wolves' den. They called it a wolves' den, and it was actually very simple. A large boulder protruded, forming a sheltered space. The Wolf King crouched high above on the massive boulder, its fur crimson, and appeared to be incredibly majestic. Behind it, there were 8 similarly fierce-looking giant wolves that were sitting like it was, and the other blood shadow wolves were under the large boulder. Some were sprawled out asleep and some were playing with each other. In the deepest part underneath the large boulder, there was a plant that was thriving with growth, and they could smell its refreshing fragrance even from this distance of about a mile away. Saintly medicine. The Empress's eyes lit up. Ling Han nodded and said, "It should be a great saint-tier medicine, Buddha heart fungus. The two of you should not be reckless." Mao Shiyu hurriedly advised them. "A saintly medicine may be good, but one should act according to one's means. If we became targeted by these blood shadow wolves, we would only be able to flee. It would not be difficult to stay alive, but if they were to be pursued by the wolf pack, how were they supposed to pass through the selection?" She had just finished her words when she saw the Empress had already stood up, and was walking towards the wolf pack. Mao Shuyu paled in shock and hurriedly planned to stop the Empress, but she was instead stopped by Ling Han. "It's fine, just let her go," Ling Han said. Mao Shuyu immediately glared angrily at Ling Han. "How could you be so heartless? That woman is clearly your wife, but you would actually watch helplessly as she jumps into danger just for the sake of a saintly medicine? You are practically scum." Flames of fury blazed in her heart, and she secretly decided to keep her distance from Ling Han in future. Merely the sight of this kind of scum made her feel disgusted. But she was completely dumbfounded with shock and stupefied when she saw the subsequent scene. The Empress had already arrived, but not only did the wolf pack not attack her, they all crouched down instead, as if they were expressing their reverence towards the Empress. This. Mao Shuyu rubbed her eyes, but the scene in front of her did not change in the slightest. Why? Her heart was filled with confusion, watching dumbly as the Empress plucked the saintly medicine, and severed the tails of 3 blood shadow wolves. Though those 3 blood shadow wolves cried out in pain, they did not become hostile, but rather lowered their posture even further. The Empress turned around, taking dainty steps, her bearing graceful. Even Mao Shiyu could not help but feel her heart throb wildly despite the fact that she was a woman herself. However, Ling Han was very clear. Both he and the Empress had formed 10 million stars before they had broken through to the Genesis tier, and their battle prowess overwhelmed all other Genesis tiers. This was something that could not be sensed by fellow cultivators, but was discovered by the blood shadow wolves that only knew bloodshed and slaughter. They were bloodthirsty and they also revered power. The Empress was a king among kings, and even the Wolf King was as docile as a dog. On the other hand, even if a severing mundane tier elite had come, these blood shadow wolves would still battle to the death. Because what they revered was a true king tier. Chapter 1676. Competing for position of captain. Prodigy, king tier, these two terms were frequently misused. If anyone's performance was the slightest bit outstanding, he would be crowned with the title of prodigy, and if he was the slightest bit more prodigious, he would be a top prodigy, a super genius. In truth, there was only one kind of person that could be termed a king tier. The grading criteria for the severing mundane tier, immortal palace tier, and the like was still unclear, but at least below celestial level, only those who had cultivated to the true pinnacle of the eternal river tier were worthy of the title of king tier. There were really too few of such king tiers, and even in top sects, only the saints could reach such a level, and in the case of other forces, they would only be able to obtain one such prodigy in a rare stroke of great fortune. The Empress walked back and showed Ling Han a bright smile as she handed the saintly medicine over to him. This could be grown in the Black Tower and then dug out when they had need of it. Now that the 6th floor of the Black Tower was open, the acceleration of growth of plants had not increased, yet it could stimulate all living organisms to grow even vigorously, and increase their medicinal effects. The Empress then gave Ling Han and Mao Shuyu each a wolf's tail, and then walked forwards, holding hands with Ling Han. The saintly medicine had been collected, and they had also obtained the wolves' tails, so they were naturally leaving. Mao Shuyu's expression was completely wooden as she took the wolf's tail. She had not come back to her senses yet at all, and the same words streaked through her mind repeatedly, "How could this be? In any case, it is still early, so why don't we get some more saintly medicine?" Ling Han's eyes shone. The Empress nodded. As long as it was Ling Han's suggestion, she would definitely not object. Mao Shuyu followed behind them, looking like a dead fish. They swept through the area, collecting a total of 6 saintly medicines, and only now did Mao Shuyu, who had barely returned to her senses, advise them that it was time to return. Otherwise, they would definitely be ranked outside the first 1,000. Ling Han was unsatisfied, but they should still be able to come here again in future, so there was no need to rush. They returned, and though they encountered the sneak attacks of a few blind demonic beasts on their way, they were all easily dealt with by Mao Shuyu. A day later they returned to the gathering area, and looking at the number that had already returned, they would probably be ranked in the 600s to 700s. It was good enough to have passed. After another half-day's time, the first 1,000 people appeared, and the selection ended. Tu Kong brought the 1,000 people with him, and they arrived at an army camp at the foot of the mountains. This was the place where they would stay for the next 100 years. They had not even entered the camp when they could feel a powerful aura ripple out. It had surpassed the level of Genesis tier, as if it was the aura of a supreme ruler. Severing mundane tier. There was a vice commander in the Dark Moon Army that had been temporarily transferred over to oversee them for 100 years. And in the Dark Moon Army, there were a total of 6 such vice commanders who would take turns to act as the overseer. Otherwise, if they encountered some troublemakers, a consummate level Genesis tier might not be able to deal with them. With a severing mundane tier overseer, it would be fine. What Genesis tier would dare provoke such an elite? Tu Kong was naturally not the only military instructor here, and there were a total of 10 of them. Usually they would be taking turns to guide the candidates on how to cooperate and work together. Those who fought alone were called cultivators, and only those who could carry out coordinated movements would be termed soldiers. 10 military instructors appeared at the same time, and that vice commander was seated high up on the platform. It was as if he had harmonized with the heaven and earth. They could clearly see where he was, but everyone would feel an uncomfortable feeling as if they could not attack him at all. This was a severing mundane tier ancestor. And now we will choose 10 captains from among you, and going by the results of the selection, the following 10 people step out. Number 170, number 534, number 895. Tu Kong began the next stage after asking for instructions from that severing mundane ancestor. The 10 people who had been pointed out stepped out, and unsurprisingly, Ding Xiaochen was also among them. When he walked out, he also bowed slightly to that severing mundane ancestor seated on the high platform, and the latter actually responded. He opened his eyes and replied with a nod. When this Grand Elder opened his eyes, it was as if the universe had collapsed. Everyone could see innumerable great stars fall down from the skies, a scene of utter destruction and annihilation, but after a shiver, they discovered that nothing strange had happened at all. This was the regulations that the severing mundane ancestor had cultivated, which were inclined towards destruction and bloodshed. The moment he opened his eyes, he could affect the masses, and for those whose wills were weaker, it was very possible that this effect would last throughout his whole life, and they would not be able to escape from under this influence forever. Cultivating Tao was naturally the Tao of heaven and earth, and if you were strapped in the Tao of another, how could you possibly be successful? That is Jianghu, Lord Jianghu, a first Severance Grand Elder, the Vice Commander of the White Tiger Army. Some people immediately whispered among themselves, and very soon, those who had initially been unaware of the identity of that severing mundane ancestor all found out. There was a great commander in the Dark Moon Army, and that was Mao Dai, a third Severance Grand Elder. Underneath the great commander there were 3 commanders who led 3 different armies, and they were the Azure Dragon Army, White Tiger Army, and the Vermilion Bird Army respectively. Why were there 3 armies and not 2 or 4 or 5? That was because there were 3 great forces in Dark Moon City. The Duan clan controlled the Azure Dragon Army, the Ding clan controlled the White Tiger Army, and the Long clan controlled the Vermilion Bird Army. From a certain aspect, the great commander Mao Dai was merely a figurehead with no actual military authority. Subordinate to the commander would be the vice commanders, and there were a total of 6, 2 for each respective army. Everyone shook their heads. With Jianghu present, that Ding Xiaochen would be able to gain the position of captain at the very least. However, with Ding Xiaochen's strength, it was actually not a difficult feat for him to accomplish. Thus, though everyone was slightly displeased, they did not have too much resistance against the idea either. The rules are as follows. The present 10 are defending champions and will accept the challenges of others. If they win, they will have successfully defended their positions, and if they lose, the defending champion will become another person. The time limit is 3 days, and at the end of the 3 days, the 10 remaining defending champions will become captains. Additionally, every battle has to be decided in an hour's time. If the victor is still undecided, it will be judged as the defending champion's victory. After every battle ends, the victor has the right to request an hour's time of rest. If he does not receive a challenge in the next hour, then the defending champion will be judged as directly winning. Then let's begin. Tu Kang's style was filled with the succinct ways of a soldier, not sluggish at all. Ding Xiaochen and the others all walked into the training grounds in the center of the army camp. The celestial realm was incredibly sturdy in the first place, and added with the fact that there was a severing mundane tier overseer, there naturally was no need to worry that the fierce battles would destroy the entire army camp. The defending champions had already appeared. Those who intended to fight for the position of a captain all looked over the 10 people, wanting to find the weakest among them that they could challenge. However, because there were only 3 days, even if there really were any pushovers, they would be very quickly replaced, so there was no meaning to being in a rush to make a move either. However, because there was still the limit of 1 hour, if there was still no challenger, the defending champion would become an assured captain, so when the hour's time was almost up, they gradually issued challenges to the 10 defending champions. As expected, luck was a big factor for entering into the top 10 during the selection. Some of them had kept their skills hidden, concealing their strength for a final explosive burst at this moment. And after a round of battles, 6 of the 10 defending champions had changed, more than half of them replaced. Ling Han looked at an elder and said to the Empress, "This guy's strength is not too bad, and it looks like his bloodline is different from others." That elder's whole body would be covered with ink-black scales when he was in battle. This was completely a thick layer of armor, which had a very strong defensive ability, so he did not have to fear the attacks of his opponent, and faced him head-on. His opponent had thus been defeated in 10 moves through this kind of method. There is that person too. The Empress looked towards a woman. Chapter 1677, Fighting Ding Xiaochen. That was a woman that was completely enshrouded in a black long dress, her features old-fashioned. Though she looked to only be in her 20s, she was serious in speech and manner, as if someone owed her a large sum of money, and disliked anyone she cast her eye on. She was ruthless in her moves, controlling the rarely seen regulations of darkness. As darkness swept past, everything would be corroded, which was incredibly frightening. Ling Han had also cultivated regulations of darkness, and that was the darkness of the paramount night, but it was more inclined towards a supplementary skill, completely different from her corrosive power that was filled with destruction. And there is that youth too. Ling Han signaled. The youth he was speaking of looked to be only in his mid-teens, still bearing a childish look on his face. Occasionally he would show a sheepish grin, but if anyone were to think that he was harmless because of that, he would be out of luck. The youth wielded a sword, which was incredibly fast and extraordinarily sharp. Previously, he had delivered a series of consecutive sword strikes and severed his opponent's weapon. The final strike had pierced the chest of his opponent, and if it were not for a light hump from Jianghu that sent him backwards, his opponent would probably have become a dead corpse by now. Crafty, vicious, and merciless. These were the traits that Ling Han had labeled this youth with. He should have gone to be an assassin. Being a soldier was really too stifling for his talent. As expected, this youth had even drawn Jianghu's attention. Though he had humphed, expressing his displeasure over how the youth had delivered a fatal strike to his companion, he could not help but cast a few more looks at this youth. This kind of talent was worthy of bringing into the Jiang clan. If he was well nurtured, he would become a severing mundane tier assassin. Though battle prowess was an important criterion for judging elites, the world did not have the rule that elites would not die in the hands of someone weaker. Of course, it was an absolutely impossible feat for a Genesis tier to kill a severing mundane tier, but for a first severance to kill a second severance or even a third severance was not just a fantasy story, and this usually happened with assassins. No one would continuously maintain his prime battle condition at all times. There would eventually come a time of carelessness, and an excellent assassin would be able to grasp this fleeting instant and move to kill him. In Jianghu's eyes, this youth was a treasure. Unfortunately, though he had the intention, he did not dare directly bring this youth back to the Jiang clan. The three clans had a rule that such talents required a fair competition among the three of them. However, since it was he who had first discovered him, he could later have the clan move to investigate the weaknesses and habits of this youth so that they could take appropriate steps. 90 years later, those that had not yet been eliminated would officially join the Dark Moon Army, and these 90 years would be the time for the three great clans to use their various methods. Some would promise great profits. Some would simply take him into the clan as a son-in-law and begin a competition among themselves for important talents. Of course, there was no single person that could simultaneously gain the interest of all three clans most of the time. There were really too few prodigies. Mao Dai, for example, had gained the admiration of who knew how many prized daughters of the three clans, yet surprisingly did not choose any one of them. However, he was also out of the control of the three great clans because of this, and maintained an absolutely independent stand. Now he was also above worldly matters, and the three great clans were all competing to attract his interest. The tournament battles continued. The Empress expressed that she would not compete for the position of captain. She was going to stay with Ling Han. One of the two of them definitely had to be a soldier. Otherwise, if they were in different teams, they would be in a competitive relationship. Elites moved respectively. Only the strong would be respected in the army. If you had defeated your opponent when he was completely exhausted, then even if you became a captain, who among your subordinates would truly respect you? Mao Shuyu had also joined the battle. She was at the consummate level of the Genesis tier, and also had 3 stars aptitude, so her battle prowess was extremely strong. She easily obtained the position of defending champion. I'll go then. Ling Han released the Empress's hand reluctantly. And the Empress nodded gently, her eyes enchanting. Ling Han leaped and arrived in front of a person. It was Ding Xiaochen. Ha. Ah. Seeing that Ling Han had actually gone to challenge Ding Xiaochen, a considerable number of people exclaimed in shock. Previously, those who had challenged Ding Xiaochen had all been defeated terribly, and now it was almost an hour's time since the last person had challenged him. It looked like he was just about to become the first person that would not need 3 days' time to become captain, yet Ling Han had thrown a wrench into his plans. This time, Ding Xiaochen would at least have to wait for another hour. Why had he challenged Ding Xiaochen? Was he trying to make things difficult for him? Ding Xiaochen was also slightly surprised, but then he showed a menacing expression. Previously, he had not managed to get a chance. He had not thought that Ling Han would actually deliver himself right into his hands. He really was courting death. If it had been the other vice commanders from the other clans, Ding Xiaochen would be stopped even if he wanted to deliver a fatal strike, but would Jianghu stop him? You're dead. Ding Xiaochen smirked coldly. I have to say, You are incomparably stupid. Your mouth stinks. Have you forgotten to rinse your mouth when you woke up? Ling Han said slowly. If it was a verbal battle, he really feared no one. The more stubborn your mouth is now, the worse your suffering will be later. Ding Xiaochen's lips slowly curled. Faced with a man that was about to die, his self-restraint was still quite good, and he did not lose composure just because he was egged on. Ho ho. Ling Han laughed, expressing all his disdain in this derisive laugh. Even if Ding Xiaochen was trained in restraint, he easily exploded in fury because of this condescending laugh. His expression was filled with rage and he forced himself to take a few deep breaths, telling himself that there was no need to drop down to the level of this brat, and he just had to kill him. You are asking for your own suffering. He moved and pressed out a palm. Boom, origin power solidified into a giant hand, a black sun shining on every fingertip, which looked incredibly bizarre. Ling Han puffed up his cheeks and blew. With an exhalation, those 5 suns were all extinguished, and this giant hand also turned back into origin power which then dissipated. Everyone was shocked as if they had just discovered Ling Han's presence, and surveyed him continuously. Was this really a cultivator in the high extreme of the Genesis tier? He had not even reached the peak stage yet, at most he could only be in the late stage. 3.5 stars aptitude was really so frightening? Even Ding Hu couldn't help but open his eyes as he surveyed Ling Han. Actually, with his strength it was the same whether he opened his eyes or not. Wherever his divine sense could reach, he could see. But because this scene was too shocking, he was emotionally stirred and opened his eyes once more. Ding Xiaochen also looked at Ling Han in shock. He did not dare believe that his move had been so simply and easily resolved. Was this 3.5 stars aptitude? Allowing him to oppose him even with the gap of a minor level between them. Fuck, was it that exaggerating? He took a deep breath and told himself not to be affected. He had yet to use any secret technique. If he used it, how easy would it be to suppress a high extreme Genesis tier? You've got some skill, but in front of me, putting aside the fact that you are only in the high extreme, even if you were in the consummate level, you would still be suppressed. Pah. Just when Ding Xiaochen had finished his words, he received a harsh slap. It naturally was delivered by Ling Han. This was definitely deliberate. He had waited until Ding Xiaochen finished speaking to slap him. This face slap was really painful and loud. Ding Xiaochen roared out angrily. His hair fluttered, his eyes becoming completely white like blazing lightning. This time he was really and truly in a thunderous rage. Having his face slapped in public like this, how could he endure any more? Die! He shouted loudly, his whole person being engulfed in the power of time, and charged towards Ling Han. He was going to crush this damn guy. Chapter 1678. Collapse at the first blow. Ding Xiaochen charged over, wrapped in the power of time. He looked as if no attack could touch him. Ling Han gave a casual flick of his finger. Pooh, sword light slashed onto Ding Xiaochen's body, yet was easily swallowed by the power of time, and he was completely unaffected. No wonder the Ding clan had deliberately targeted the Hu clan, and snatched away the secret technique of the Hu clan. This celestial technique was indeed powerful. When the power of time spread out, they could practically ignore the gap in battle prowess, allowing the user to become invincible. However, Ling Han too had a considerable number of celestial techniques in his grasp. Ha had even learnt the Tide of the Ages as well, and had more so obtained the complete secret technique from Hu Yu. In terms of the grasp of this type of celestial technique, Ling Han was not inferior to the Ding clan at all. The difference lay in the fact that his present cultivation level was still too low, so he was unable to completely execute the might of this celestial technique to the fullest. Haha, in front of the ultimate technique of our Ding clan, what can you do? Ding Xiaochen's confidence returned, and he called out arrogantly. Though killing Ling Han could not possibly make up for the humiliation that he had suffered, if he allowed Ling Han to stay alive, he would probably be unable to raise his head ever again in this lifetime. Ling Han smiled slightly and flicked another finger. Xiao, another flash of sword light streaked past, but this time it forcibly penetrated the power of time covering Ding Xiaochen. Still, because its might had been weakened slightly, it only managed to tear open this layer of power of time before vanishing. But it was this one move that terrified Ding Xiaochen to the extreme. He hurriedly stopped, his expression revealing his extreme shock. The other party had actually broken through his power of time. Though he had not managed to wound him, if he had continued with another strike, he would have been in deep trouble. Impossible. When he used the Tide of the Ages, it should have aged any kind of attack. It should be known that he was a peak stage Saint King, and his cultivation level was already highest in this tier. If anyone wanted to suppress him in terms of regulations, that could only be accomplished by a severing mundane ancestor. How did Ling Han manage to do it? Not only was he stunned, Jianghu also revealed a hint of surprise. He had a kind of feeling that Ling Han perhaps had not exerted his full effort yet. Without using his full efforts, he was already able to defeat a young prodigy of the Ding clan? And while he himself was only in the high extreme of the Genesis tier at that. Just what kind of freak was this? Jianghu was slightly hesitant. Ordinarily, the Ding clan should try as much as possible to gain this kind of prodigy with 3.5 stars aptitude, but looking at the present situation, it seemed like this boy had a very large conflict with Ding Xiaochen. Then going by first impressions, this boy definitely did not have a favorable impression of the Ding clan. In future, even if they offered the same conditions to attract him, the possibility that Ling Han would lean towards the Long clan and the Duan clan was much greater. Since that was the case, a killing intent suddenly surged up in Dinghu's heart. Mao Dai was a previous example. They allowed him to freely mature, and the result? He had now become a force that could become a threat to the 3 great clans by himself. Thankfully he only had a daughter. If the Mao clan had also prospered, then it was possible that a 4th great force would appear in the Dark Moon City. The cake was only so big, and who would be willing to have others take a share of their own profits? The best scenario was for Ding Xiaochen to show his might and kill this brat. In any case, wasn't an accidentally fatal move a very common thing to happen in the tournament battles? After a moment of shock, Ding Xiaochen finally pulled himself together. He drew out a saber. The saber was dark green in color and seemed to have been made from wood, but a frightening murderous aura immediately surged out the moment he drew this weapon. This murderous aura took the form of a giant tree, and what was shocking was the fact that the great tree was brandishing its vine-like branches, dancing around as if they were whips. Jade blood man-eating tree. Around them many people exclaimed in shock, their faces green. This was a demonic tree that was fond of hunting humans and demonic beasts. When it was immobile, it was like any ordinary tree, but if anyone arrived at the base of the tree, the demonic tree would attack at the most unexpected moment, and wrap its vines around its prey. Furthermore, there were sharp spikes which could excrete poison and numb its target in an instant on its vines. Using the trunk of this tree as the main body, and sealing the spirit of the demonic tree within, the precious tool that was refined would also possess most of the might of the demonic tree. This was an extremely frightening god tool. The tournament battles did not forbid the use of weapons, because what the Dark Moon Army needed were soldiers that could kill others, and not cultivators that would be sparring and competing with others. Ding Xiaochen was instantly brimming with confidence now that he had his saber in hand. The saber's blade shone with green light, and even his face turned green from the glow. Previously he had not encountered anyone that could match him yet, so he naturally had not even bothered to use the god tool, but now he was forced into it by Ling Han. He did not rush to attack. There was presently a green murderous aura surging out of the blade, spreading in all directions. This was the spirit of the jade blood man-eating tree. Because the process of refining it was extremely frightening, the spirit of the demonic tree was also filled with fury, and its killing intent was astonishing. Because he was the wielder, he was completely immune to this kind of murderous aura, but the others would be affected. Though the jade blood man-eating tree was a plant-type demonic breed, aside from the fact that it cultivated the wood element regulations by nature, it also had poison element regulations. This was its unique trait. Regulations had no form and were fused within its spirit, so there was a strong poison mingled inside this murderous aura. Go die. Ding Xiaochen glared coldly at Ling Han and declared, when the spirit-severing saber appears, no one will stay alive. Ling Han laughed loudly. It is really too sad not to become a comedian with your talent. Listen to a piece of advice from me. From tomorrow onwards, it would be better for you to go to restaurants and inns in the city to have your own show. Stubborn. Ding Xiaochen used his origin power so that the might of the divine saber in his hands could be released even faster. Ling Han shook his head and said, at first I wanted to see how much strength you actually had. I never thought that the basis of your confidence is a mere saber. I can't even be bothered to watch you continue your performance. His figure flashed and he charged towards Ding Xiaochen. Lightning flash was used, and his speed was incredibly and extraordinarily fast. Even if he had not used it to its fullest, It was no longer something that Ding Xiaochen could catch up with, just like how he had received a slap from Ling Han, and still had not realized how he had been slapped even at this moment. When Ling Han's fist was about to punch Ding Xiaochen's face, only then did he become alert, but it was already too late for him to brandish his saber in a slash against Ling Han at this time. He could only produce a burst of speed and retreat backwards quickly. But could this be a match for Ling Han's speed? Ding Xiaochen's face instantly received a solid punch, and he couldn't help but stumble backwards. However, he had not steadied his footing yet when Ling Han's second punch had already fallen. Ping ping ping. In just that short instant he had already been hit with over a dozen punches. Collapsing at the first blow, Ling Han stated calmly, and as if providing evidence for his judgment, Ding Xiaochen's figure was sent flying before landing heavily on the ground. All around them there was a dead silence. Even the other battles had all stopped and everyone's attention was drawn here. Ding Xiaochen had really collapsed at the first blow. From the start to finish, Ling Han had only flicked his fingers and waved his fists around. He had not used any powerful technique at all, but what about Ding Xiaochen? He had used celestial techniques and a god tool, but he did not even manage to hold up to a single strike from Ling Han. Was this the gap between 3 stars and 3.5 stars of aptitude? Everyone was in disbelief. Perhaps if the two of them had the same cultivation level, this kind of difference was still possible, but Ding Xiaochen clearly had the advantage of a minor level, so how could such a situation possibly happen? Ding Xiaochen struggled to his feet and pang, he was sent back to the ground with another blow from Ling Han. On the tournament stage, as long as one party had not collapsed or admitted defeat, the battle would continue. Ding Xiaochen was unwilling to admit defeat. He had already lost all his pride from being beaten by Ling Han, and if he was to admit defeat in public, then he would really be unable to hold his head high ever again. Chapter 1679. Completely shameless. But what was the point of forcefully enduring like this? Ding Xiaochen was continuously sent to the ground, his face already swollen horribly, and Ling Han was also very measured in his blows. He did not put too much strength so that Ding Xiaochen would pass out, but rather allowed him to maintain a completely conscious state. Would he admit defeat? Ding Xiaochen gritted his teeth. This was his final bottom line. He would definitely not speak up and admit defeat. Initially, Ling Han planned to continue playing around like this, but when he saw that there was not enough time left, he shot out a kick and sent Ding Xiaochen out of the battle area. According to the rules, this naturally was judged as a loss. Humph. Ding, who was extremely displeased and suddenly opened his eyes, glaring at Ling Han. Ling Han couldn't help but take a step back, his face suddenly turning pale. He had been struck by Dinghu. This strike had no form or shape, and was only a humph, yet contained Dinghu's martial intent. Just how powerful was a severing mundane ancestor? If they had been in the ancient realm, then a mere thought would be enough to shatter a great star. And now, this kind of psychic blade had struck Ling Han, so how could it possibly be a pleasant feeling? Fortunately, Dinghu did not dare commit murder in public, so he could only use limited power, and Ling Han's physique was astonishingly strong, so this psychic blade actually only caused minor injuries to Ling Han. Dinghu's expression involuntarily turned slightly ugly. His initial intention had been to cause a severe injury to Ling Han. This kind of result caused him both displeasure and shock. This young man's physique was too shocking. He only suffered minor injuries even after taking a psychic blade from him. With his identity, if his first attack had missed, he should not have been so shameless to make another move, but Dinghu did not have that kind of magnanimous bearing, and couldn't help but throw out another psychic blade. Pooh! Ling Han's chest instantly split open and blood gushed out. Even his half-star divine metal-level physique could not block such a blow. The severing mundane tear was too strong. Ling Han stumbled. He knew this must have been a move from Dinghu. In this place, only this severing mundane tear could have posed a threat to him. He only felt an agony in his chest like a flame burning. Dinghu was really too despicable. Not only did he wound him with a psychic blade, he also inserted a sliver of his own martial intent into the blade. His purpose was to torment him for a few decades. This was a warning. To dare wound a member of his Ding clan, this would be the punishment. Of course, if Ling Han encountered other severing mundane tier elites, he could ask the latter to help him dissipate this martial intent, but the question here was, how many people would be willing to offend the Ding clan for the sake of a nameless nobody? Every elite had their unique martial intent, and there were only 30+ severing mundane tiers in Dark Moon City, so they were all familiar with each other. Ling Han steadied his footing and looked towards Ding Hu, his eyes burning with blazing fighting spirit as well as a kind of powerful disdain. Your Ding clan only knows how to bully others with your superior might. A so-called severing mundane ancestor actually made a move on a junior twice, and was actually shamed into anger just because he had missed. How utterly shameless. On the other side, the Empress was also bursting with killing intent. Not one person actually dared to stand within 30 meters of her. They had all stepped back, or their hearts would have burst. However, the Empress did not move rashly. It was true that she was proud, but if she had been a rash fool, how could she have possibly sat on the throne of the chaotic star's majestic empire for 1,000,000 years? She would have long since been taken into someone else's harem as a prized possession. And now, she had to bear it. The Empress clenched her hands into fists, her beautiful eyes flickering with the flames of rage. If looks could kill, then Ding Hu would have already died a few thousand times over. A dead silence fell. Anyone could guess that this had been a move from Ding Hu, but who would dare to rebuke a severing mundane ancestor? Even Mao Shuyu was hesitant. Her father had strictly told her to conduct herself virtuously, and not to have any kind of involvement with the three great clans. Ding Hu calmly said, "In the previous battle, 3590 has been sent out of the grounds by 5574, but 5574 has also been seriously wounded by 3590, and this battle would barely be considered a victory for 5574. 3590 was Ding Xiaochen's serial number, and 5574 was Ling Han's. Going by Ding Hu's explanation, Ding Xiaochen was actually more or less Ling Han's equal. Though he had been sent flying, he had also wounded Ling Han severely. Fuck, could he be any more shameless? It clearly was Ding Xiaochen that had been terribly defeated, and you were also the one who had wounded Ling Han, yet actually shamelessly placed this merit under Ding Xiaochen's name. Correct. Ding Hu making a move on Ling Han was bullying the weak with his superior strength, but in Ding Xiaochen's case, that was a battle of equals. Though there was a gap of a whole minor level, it could just barely be considered just. The word merit was not used in an exaggerated manner. If it were not for the fact that Ding Xiaochen had actually been sent flying out, Ding Xiaochen might even distort the facts, and it was possible that he would judge this as Ling Han's loss. When Ding Hu finished his words, a commotion broke out among the 1,000 or so gathered here. They had seen some shameless people, but this was their first time that they had seen someone shameless to this extent. Humph. Ding Hu's eyes swept over them, and as a frightening intimidation surged out, it instantly suppressed everyone's displeasure. Who dared violate the authority of a severing mundane ancestor? Once again a dead silence fell. Only then did Ding Hu nod in satisfaction and declared, "Continue the challenges." When everyone heard this, their expressions shifted once more. What Ding Hu meant was there was no need to allow Ling Han to rest, and they could begin challenging Ling Han immediately. But Ling Han had just been severely wounded by a severing mundane ancestor, and was not even allowed the slightest bit of recovery time. How could he possibly be able to bear anyone's attacks? Even an eternal river tier would probably be able to defeat him. So ruthless, everyone exclaimed in their minds. Though Ding Xiaochen had been defeated and had even lost the ability to fight any longer, and thus had no hope of claiming the position of a captain, Ding Hu had no plans of allowing Ling Han to become a captain either. Ding Hu broke into a faint smile. Merely a nameless nobody, and he thought he could oppose the Ding clan. What a joke. He had 10,000 ways that he could kill Ling Han with. After a momentary silence, the battle continued, but Ding Hu's expression was still incredibly dark because though Ling Han was proudly standing there, bleeding non-stop, no one actually moved to challenge him. These people. Ding Hu only felt that his authority had received a great provocation. He already said that they could challenge him, but there was not a single person that made a move on Ling Han. Did these people plan to rebel against him? His eyes swept over them and everyone lowered their heads, not daring to make eye contact with him. Everyone had a bottom line, and what Ding Hu had done today had already crossed everyone's bottom line. Cultivators only respected true strength. If Ding Hu had called out anyone to challenge Ling Han, then no one would have been able to endure such pressure, and would definitely have been compelled to move. However, the law did not punish numerous offenders. Ding Hu couldn't punish all of them, right? Then, it was natural that no one would step out to challenge Ling Han. Even if they could defeat Ling Han now, they would be scorned by others in future. Who would respect such a captain? Everyone did not dare oppose a severing mundane ancestor directly, yet they were using this kind of method to express their support for Ling Han. Ling Han's figure stood upright, unbending and unyielding. At present my strength is inferior to yours, but if you want to suppress me, I will definitely not allow your wish to come true. Even minor characters had their own backbone. They could be defeated but would definitely not abandon their pride. However, Ling Han's injuries were actually not as severe as Jianghu thought. He had already channeled a drop of indestructible true fluid to control his injuries, but because of Jianghu's martial intent, he could not completely heal them. This would require him to enter the Black Tower, and have the power of the Black Tower erase his martial intent. The present Ling Han still had 70% of his battle prowess at least. And even this was enough to overwhelm all other Genesis tiers aside from the Empress. Very soon an hour had passed. Normally, since Jianghu had already said that challenges could immediately begin, then the countdown should have begun from that moment, and Ling Han would already be the first that has risen above the others, and become the first captain of this selection of reserve troops. However, Jianghu sent a warning gaze at Tu Kang, signaling that the countdown of 1 hour was only to begin now. This man was already completely shameless and Ling Han ignored him completely. When he had gained enough strength he would raise the Ding clan to the ground and by then he would really want to see what kind of expressions would be on the faces of these bastards of the Ding clan. Chapter 1680. If the price is high enough. Jianghu's expression was dark. As a severing mundane tier, it had already been a very long time since he had such an unpleasant experience, but now a mere Genesis tier actually caused him to bear such a powerful killing intent. He declared, "For those who can obtain the position of captain this time round, I will present a reward of 10 star stones." Star stones were a natural resource unique to the celestial realm, and were made from the shards of stars above the 9 heavens which were also meteorites. The 9 heavens of the celestial realm could not be ascended. As legend had it, only celestial kings could ascend, so one could only wait until the shards of stars in the skies fell down as meteorites to be able to refine star stones out of them. The Tao of heaven and earth were contained within, and were of great help to the advancement of cultivation level for cultivators. Including the Dark Moon Army, every soldier of the enlisted army could obtain 2 star stones as their pay, and every member of the reserve troops would earn 1. Even a captain could only earn 2, which was the same as any soldier of the official army. And now Jianghu promised 10 star stones. This reward could be claimed to be quite generous. Don't think that time was cheap in the celestial realm. Because competition in the celestial realm was cruel, time would only be more valuable. What was Jianghu's purpose? Everyone was clear. He wanted to use wealth to get others to make a move on Ling Han. If I exert pressure, you all think that the law does not punish numerous offenders and ignore me completely, but what about 10 star stones? Who could refuse? To Jianghu, taking out 100 star stones naturally was only a small token, merely the cultivation resources for 1 month for a severing mundane tier. If the price was high enough there would be those who were willing to be bought. Previously no one had made any move. Firstly, even if they defeated Ling Han, they would be uncomfortable even in the position of captain. It was like there was a fire lit under their behinds. But it was a different story with a reward of 10 star stones. A lot of people were willing to give it a try. There would be one person that would be eliminated from the reserve troops every single year. What if they were eliminated in their very first year? Hence, 10 star stones were still considerably valuable. Xiao, a person shot out and stood in front of Ling Han. It was a man whose looks were not outstanding. He clasped his hands in Ling Han's direction and asked, "Brother, I have no wish to wound you, so could you admit defeat on your own volition?" Ling Han's eyes burned fiercely. Facing a man that planned to take advantage of his critical state, what need was there for him to be polite? "Scram," he stated calmly. "You take my kindness as ill intention?" The man smirked coldly and suddenly shot out, charging towards Ling Han. As he saw it, with how severely wounded Ling Han was at present, he would be able to defeat him with a light blow. Thus, he even cautiously controlled his strength to avoid killing Ling Han with a single blow. Ling Han moved and gripped that man's neck with a single move. Then he slammed him into the ground. Peng, that man was instantly sent heavily onto the ground. He had not even managed to get up when Ling Han had already stepped on his head. "Take off your foot." The man roared in fury. This was too humiliating. He pushed with both hands against the ground, wanting to stand back up. Ling Han ignored him. He only looked at Jianghu, who was on the high platform. Then, with a slight effort of his right foot, pang, the man's head below his foot was forcibly stomped into the hard rock. It should be known that the rocks here were extremely hard, and were completely capable of sustaining a powerful barrage from a Genesis tier, yet Ling Han actually stomped a man's head in with one foot. What kind of concept was that? The arms of the man below his foot immediately drooped lifelessly as he had directly passed out. Ling Han's foot was placed on that man's head, while his eyes were fixed on Jianghu. His provocation was leaping from his action. Come on then, what other tricks do you have? I will take all of them on. How domineering. Everyone paled in silence. This brat was really fierce to actually dare to oppose a vice commander publicly like this. Could it be that he did not know that this vice commander would be their overseer for as long as 100 years here? If you were not eliminated, then you would have to live under his shadow for the next 100 years. But even more people could feel their blood burn hot, feeling that this was what a true man was, and this was what a true cultivator should be like. The fury of even an ordinary man could spill blood in all directions. Jianghu's little finger involuntarily moved. This was a signal that he was close to being unable to control his killing intent. But if he dared make a move to kill at this moment, he definitely would be targeted by the Long clan and Duan clan. It was not impossible that he would be punished with death, even. The relations between the three great clans definitely could not be considered amiable, especially with the Ding clan's precedent. They had caused another prestigious clan, the Hu clan, to suffer a destructive calamity, so who would not guard against them? There will be a chance, there will be many chances in future. Jianghu told himself mentally. He closed his eyes once more, ignoring Ling Han's provocation. He actually did not know what was going on. The moment he set eyes on Ling Han, he felt dislike for him. Otherwise, how could he have so quickly forced a 3.5 stars aptitude prodigy onto the opposing sides of the Ding clan? Perhaps he had seen the hatred that Ling Han bore towards the Ding clan in his eyes. After an hour, another greedy man moved to attack Ling Han, thinking that his might was only short-lived, and that it was impossible for him to continue such a performance, but the result was still the Samia was pressed down onto the ground by Ling Han with a single move, and had his head stomped into rock. There really was no one else that was this domineering. After this, no one else dared challenge Ling Han. He was too powerful. Before the 3 days' time had passed, the 10 captains had actually all emerged. Everyone had eyes they could see with. Those who could successively win over a dozen battles were definitely overwhelmingly strong, so it would be better for them to avoid seeking their own suffering. Next, it was the allocation of members for the 10 troops. Every person could choose to follow any of the captains, and the captain could also choose whether to take them in or otherwise. This was a two-sided decision. When everyone had made their choice, those remaining would be randomly stuffed into the troops that did not have the full 100 whether they liked it or not. Ling Han stood, his blood still flowing profusely. The martial intent of severing Mundane tier was wreaking havoc in his blood and flesh, and even the indestructible Heaven Scroll was unable to expel it. This gap in cultivation level was really too wide. He was like a lone wolf that had been injured and was bleeding, yet his fighting spirit burned even fiercer than before and was more frightening now. The Empress naturally chose him to be her captain without hesitation, but aside from her, no one else dared come over to his side. Who dared to offend Jianghu? Previously, it could be claimed that the law did not punish numerous offenders, but if anyone were to take the initiative to follow Ling Han now, then wasn't that a direct slap to Jianghu's face? Who would dare slap the face of a severing Mundane ancestor? Compared to the other captains who had many visitors, Ling Han's side was deserted. An indifferent smile hung on his lips, and he was indeed uncaring. He merely wanted to make use of the Dark Moon Army to fit in with the Celestial Realm, and did not have any other thoughts aside from that. Since he had no particular ambition, he naturally feared nothing. Of course, he definitely had a clear short-term goal by now, and that was to destroy the Ding clan. The other 9 captains soon finished their recruitment, and the remaining 98 people had no other alternative, and were forcibly listed under Ling Han's banner. At this time, they had no further need to use serial numbers, and registered their own names and personal information. Ling Han found out that assassin that looked like a kid was named Wei Bo, the woman who used the corrosive power of darkness was called Qin Hinyu, and the old man covered in black scales was called Luo Xinyang. Because Ling Han's subordinates were all those remaining after the best had been chosen, their quality was naturally also the most inferior. It was inevitable that they were all sighing in despair. It looked like they would all be bullied by the others in the upcoming 100 years. Chapter 1681, A Mission Has Arrived. The fact that close to 1,000 people would be divided into 10 teams was naturally not merely for the convenience of administration. There was another purpose. Theoretically, they would be able to earn a star stone as their yearly pay, but there was another rule among the reserve troops, and that was that there would be a major tournament held among the 10 teams every year. The team that ranked the lowest among the 10 teams would lose their pay for the next year, and it would be presented as a reward for the top team. Ling Han's subordinates were all poor quality, and were made up of the worst members. How could their team possibly compare with the other 9 teams? Weren't they destined to be the lowest rank? Thus every single one of them looked depressed. Some even thought of withdrawing. Why shouldn't they take the initiative to be eliminated in the next year? They could wait another 100 years to be enlisted in the army. Ling Han did not say anything. In truth, he could defeat a team of 100 all by himself. Furthermore, he was the Alchemy Emperor. There was no lack of alchemical pills here. He could completely refine a great volume of high-grade divine pills. As long as they followed his lead loyally, Ling Han could guarantee that he would not disappoint any single one of them. Of course, those who merely wanted to take advantage of him could just stay as far away from him as possible. Jianghu glanced coldly at Ling Han. He would make use of his methods to ensure that Ling Han disappeared as soon as possible. They all entered the camp. Every person had a single room to rest in. Actually, they did not have much to do usually, and would simply be trained in the art of cooperative attacks. Occasionally, they would have practical battles to destroy a band of mountain bandits that were not too powerful. However, this kind of practical battle would ordinarily be scheduled for 10 years later. Without proper coordination, people would die too fast in a major battle. After Ling Han and the Empress entered their room, they immediately entered the Black Tower. Ling Han used the power of the Black Tower to erase the martial intent that Jianghu had left in him. Once this power of regulation had vanished, his physical body immediately recovered. The Empress's expression was icy and she declared, "I want to go into seclusion, and break through to the severing mundane tier within 3 years. 3 years later, there will not be a single living being left of the Ding clan." Someone dared to wound her husband, so the Empress's killing intent was already blazing. "Don't." Ling Han wrapped his arms around her and laid a kiss on her black locks. If you simply focus on cultivation, you will be able to reach the peak stage of the consummate level of the Genesis tier, but if you want to break through to the severing mundane tier, you will have to go to a special place. Why was it said that the Saint King tier was the end of the road in the ancient realm? This was not because of natural talent or cultivation technique, but rather because one needed a special location in the celestial realm if he wanted to break through to severing mundane tier. He would only be able to interact with the prehistoric powers of the heavenly Tao, and deal a blow with the heavens will saber onto himself there. Otherwise, it was useless. Even if you had the aptitude of a celestial king, you would only be stuck on the level of Saint King tier. The Empress's fury did not lessen, and she said, "Then I will reach the consummate level of the Genesis tier as soon as possible." She was filled with confidence in herself. As long as she had reached the peak stage of the Saint King tier, she would be able to successfully undergo the first severance, and become a severing mundane tier. Ling Han shook her head. Breaking through to the severing mundane tier is not that easy. What is the severing mundane tier? That is to sever one's mortal bonds and completely merge with the great Tao. In other words, the more reluctant you are to sever the mortal bond that you will sever, the more completely you will be able to merge with the Tao of heaven and earth. This was what the heavenly Emperor of Thunder and Fire had told Ling Han alone. Severing mundane tier had to undergo 4 severances in total, but putting aside 4 severances, even when undergoing the first severance, the majority of elites would become incredibly cold and detached because they had already cast away something that they cared most about. Usually this first severance would be dealt to kinship, love and friendship. Only now did the Empress reveal an expression of shock. For her, the most important thing now was Ling Han. If she was to deal the first severance to love, she would rather die. But if she brought such an obsession to break through to the severing mundane tier, she might kill herself in the process, and disappear for eternity in this world. How could it be so easy to achieve immortality? How could it be possible that they could accomplish such a feat without having to sacrifice something? The Empress thought for a moment and said, "If I had to deal such a blow to myself, then I would rather not become immortal, and be together with you for this lifetime." The severing mundane tear did not necessarily mean that one had to sever love. Anything that one valued could be severed, but when things had really reached that step, under the torture of the furnace of the heaven and earth, most people would face their own conscience directly, and would unconsciously sever their most important mortal bond. Who could maintain a clear mind in front of the great Tao? Only a prodigy among prodigies could do so. Hence, if we want to sever our mortal bonds, we have to plan carefully. Ling Han embraced the Empress's waist. It was not only her. Every single person in the Black Tower had to make their own preparations well. Otherwise they would easily sever the emotional bonds with their family and love. Ling Han arrived at the base of the reincarnation tree. Everyone was continuously cultivating. The Black Tower had harvested the spiritual chi of the celestial realm, and added with the help of the reincarnation tree, everyone could be considered to be progressing in leaps and bounds. After Ling Han explained the situation to them, he and the Empress exited the Black Tower. The people inside could not come out yet. No matter what, it would have to wait until they could merge the regulations of the two realms. After a night of rest, training began. With teams as the unit of measure, the 10 teams were assigned to be led by 10 military instructors. The military instructor for Ling Han's team was Wu Jing, a middle-aged man with a rounded, plump build and a peak stage Saint King. "You pieces of trash, useless fleas, wanting me to train you is completely an insult to me." As Wu Jing trained them, he showered them with a torrent of abuse. "I gave up the option of staying with my comrades in arms to train you merely to watch your monkey acts. Trash. Idiot. Even pigs are 100 times smarter than you all." His insults rained down. Whether you performed well or poorly, you would first be treated to a dose of abuse. In the first place, the team's morale was already very low due to following Ling Han, and now with a torrent of abuse from the instructor, they naturally felt even worse, and wanted nothing more than to immediately withdraw. But it was not easy for them to enter, and leaving was not that easy either. By now, they only had 2 ways they could leave. Firstly, one person would be eliminated every year, and secondly, they could die for various reasons and leave in death. By now, everyone was targeting that single place for elimination, so their performance was naturally as bad as possible. However, merely on the 3rd day, Wu Jing announced with a strange expression on his face that they had been assigned a mission to suppress bandits, and were to set out immediately. What, so fast? Everyone exchanged looks, all feeling that this was too abrupt. They had just learnt a little of cooperative attacks, and they could not be considered to be able to cooperate with each other at all, nor were they able to coordinate with one another, yet they were actually told to suppress bandits. This was practically sending them to their deaths. Perhaps they could succeed, but the price they had to pay would definitely be very astonishing. Maybe half of the people here would not be able to make it back alive. They were not fools, and immediately guessed that this had to be Ding Hu's scheme to target Ling Han, and they were merely cannon fodder. He couldn't directly send Ling Han to his death, right? "Ling Han, you are the captain, this mission must be completed perfectly." Wu Jing handed him a jade scroll. "The details on this group of mountain bandits are in here. They are merely a mob of misfits, and there are only 10 peak stage Saint Kings. Thus, the losses on this mission must be limited to less than 10, and if this number is exceeded, you will be punished by martial law when you return." So vicious. Chapter 1682, Easily Resolved. Ling Han definitely did not believe Wu Jing's words. Perhaps he was merely passing on a message, and even he himself was not clear about the true strength of that band of mountain bandits, but Ling Han was sure that since this was Ding Hu's scheme to target him, how could he possibly allow him to so easily pass the test? This band of mountain bandits had to be very strong. Even if they could not kill Ling Han, they would be capable of causing serious damage to his team, and even if Ling Han returned, he would be punished heavily. Then he could simply find an excuse to get rid of Ling Han in prison. Ling Han shook his head. As a great severing mundane ancestor, did he have to go to such trouble to deal with him? This was also because the 3 great clans impeded each other. Otherwise, Ding Hu definitely did not have to go to so much trouble. He could kill him as he liked, and who would dare say anything? A military order could not be disobeyed. The team of 100 set out, and even their military instructor could not follow, which made it clear that this was a trap to the fullest. Yet Ling Han was filled with confidence. Ding Hu had miscalculated 2 points. Firstly, Ling Han's injuries had healed, and his battle prowess had completely recovered. Secondly, the Empress also had incredible battle prowess. Putting aside the fact that the two of them would be working together, either one of them could easily overwhelm any Genesis tier. Unless male and female Saint tiers of the great sects appeared, who could match these two? They had both formed 10 million stars when they were in the Eternal River tier. No matter how fierce their enemy was, one of the two would be attacking, while the other would be on defense, which was enough to perfectly deal with every enemy. However, though Ling Han and the Empress had confidence, that was not the same for the others. Rather than running to their deaths, they might as well become deserters. Worst come to worst, they would just have to never return to Dark Moon City. The moment they exited the city, there were some that planned to sneak away. Ling Han moved, apprehended 13 people who attempted to flee and pushed out the two leaders. They were the ones who had established contact with the others, which led to this incident of army desertion. I know that everyone does not have much confidence in this mission, but I will make a declaration. As long as I am here, nothing will be a problem. This time, I will only give a light punishment as warning, but if anyone has any further plans of deserting, then do not blame me for dealing with you as per martial law, Ling Han stated menacingly. Everyone pursed their lips. You say it so easily, but if we really fight with the mountain bandits, how are you going to guarantee our safety? But Ling Han's aggressive move had intimidated all of them. At least for the moment, no one dared desert the army, but the moment the battle began, they might take advantage of the chaos to flee. They exited the city gates and headed towards the chaotic Wind Mountains. It was a total of 7 days' journey from Dark Moon City, and there was an important trade route at the base of the chaotic Wind Mountains, which connected Dark Moon City with Bayou City. And now a group of mountain bandits had set up camp in the chaotic Wind Mountains, and they would occasionally raid the coming and going traveling merchants. In truth, there were mountain bandits every year, and the traveling merchants had long since become used to them. Furthermore, most mountain bandits would not kill all of them, and would only ask for some passage fees. Otherwise, if there were malicious battles, there would definitely be deaths and injuries, so how could it be that the mountain bandits would not fear death too? However, this band of mountain bandits was different. They were vicious and merciless, and would kill every single traveling merchant they came across, not leaving a single one alive. Furthermore, they were very cunning too. If the traveling merchants hired powerful guards, they would choose to avoid them, but if they could succeed, they would eliminate the entire group of traveling merchants without hesitation. Ling Han had already drawn up a strategy on their way there. They would all disguise themselves as merchants, and lure the mountain bandits to make a move on them. To guarantee that the mountain bandits would move out, Ling Han even had the few peak stage Saint Kings hide in the carriages. However, this was actually unnecessary because there were not many elites among their team in the first place, and there were only a mere 6 peak stage Saint Kings. They drove their carriages and did not hide their identities. They showed the banner of the Dark Moon Army, but for anyone who had the slightest bit of experience, they would be able to confirm with a glance that this group were definitely rookies. Added with their bountiful cargo, this was practically making an announcement to others to come and rob them. Though this plan was very simple, it was very practical. They had not stepped into the area of the chaotic Wind Mountains for very long when Ling Han discovered that someone was tailing them. He even deliberately had the fleet of carriages speed up, making it clear that he knew that the situation was not good, and was planning to quickly flee. This move was very useful. Another 4 hours later, a group of people had charged out from 2 sides, blocking their advance and any route of retreat. We want only valuables, so obediently submit yourselves to capture. When we leave, we will naturally set you all free. A bandit declared smilingly. This naturally was a lie. If anyone really surrendered themselves to be captured, then their fate would definitely be death. The Empress stood up. With her prideful personality, she naturally was not suited to protect others, so she was in charge of offense, while Ling Han was responsible for defense. The mountain winds blew past, and the Empress's long skirts fluttered. The fabric wrapped tightly around her slender frame, showing her perfect, flawless figure. Instantly, a round of people swallowing their drool was heard. "Beauty, take off your veil and give us a look," a mountain bandit demanded with a whistle. "Ninth, who knows if this woman has an ugly face? Just for this kind of figure, no matter how ugly she looks, I want her. Worst comes to worst, I'll just cover her face. With the lights out, what would be the point no matter how beautiful she is?" Ha ha ha. The mountain bandits all erupted in raucous laughter, staring at the Empress pervertedly. Every time they had a raid, if there were any women among the traveling merchants, they would definitely suffer their various asterisk. Xiao with a flash, the Empress had already charged out. Her life philosophy was extraordinarily simple. If she was not happy, she'd just kill whatever made her unhappy. A human head flew into the skies, and they could see that the Empress was standing behind that ninth. The latter was only left with a headless body, and fresh blood was still gushing from his neck. The mountain bandits were all shocked. What astonishing speed and what frightening strength. Woman, you are quite courageous to kill one of our own. A man who looked to be the leader stepped out. He looked at the Empress menacingly. At first, I planned to spare your life, but you are so determined to seek your own demise. He waved his hand and commanded, kill them all. The mountain bandits all shouted and charged out. Every 5 of them were a small team, forming a unique formation, cooperating well with each other, so whether it was attack or defense, their might was greatly increased. The Empress's figure trembled and 9 doppelgangers split out. The 10 Empresses danced and flew around like butterflies, but wherever they passed they would bring a reign of terror. One after another the mountain bandits became corpses and collapsed. No one could take a second blow from the Empress, even if she had divided herself into 10 doppelgangers, and they began their respective slaughter. Seeing this scene, Ling Han's team finally flared up. So this band of mountain bandits were actually so weak. No, it was not that the mountain bandits were too weak, but rather that the Empress was too strong. Heavens, they had thought that only Ling Han was strong, but how could one person be able to eliminate all the mountain bandits no matter how strong he was? But now with the help of the Empress, it was a different story. With one on the offense and the other on the defense, it was enough to guarantee that none of them would die. Ling Han's previous promise had not been the slightest bit false. Charge. They all flared up as well and charged towards the mountain bandits. Chapter 1683, Capture All in One Go. The Empress had gone on a rampage while Ling Han was taking charge of the overall situation. His divine sense had spread out, and if any soldier encountered danger, he would strike out with the lightning sword technique. It was indescribably fast, and as long as the opponent was not a severing mundane tier, he would be able to save the person who was in danger. As time passed, everyone realized this fact. The new soldiers all felt revitalized. This was equivalent to having their safety assured, so they naturally all became brave. On the other hand, the mountain bandits' morale had declined greatly because they could not kill a single soldier of the Dark Moon Army, or even cause severe wounds no matter what they did. Retreat! 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 The mountain bandit who looked to be their leader swiftly called out loudly, and he was the first to turn around and run. However, under the Empress's pursuit, who would be able to successfully flee? Very soon this group of mountain bandits were all eradicated, leaving behind only 3 survivors for the purpose of interrogation. This was a full and complete victory, and there was not a single person who had suffered a serious injury on the side of the Dark Moon Army, merely a few who had sustained light injuries. If it had been an official troop, their military success might even not have been as excellent as theirs. Thus, everyone felt incredibly invigorated. They naturally knew that the reason that they had been able to win so easily was because of Ling Han and the Empress. After this battle, their confidence had also returned. So what if they were those that remained after the best had been chosen? As long as their captain and his wife were there, what team could possibly be a match for them? The strength of cultivators came through battles, and Ling Han had used this great victory to finally win the respect of all of his subordinates. Ling Han interrogated each of the 3 mountain bandits individually. This was not the whole band of mountain bandits. He had found out that the boss of the mountain bandits was named Jiang Wushang, and was extremely strong. In any case, the several deputies were no match for him at all. Additionally, the number of remaining mountain bandits was around 300 people. Ling Han immediately decided that the majority of their team would rest here, while he and the Empress would charge into the mountain bandits' lair, and eliminate all the mountain bandits. His decision faced the objection of all his teammates. They all thought that this was too dangerous. Aside from an incredibly strong chief among the mountain bandits, there were also 8 other deputy chiefs, and all of them were very powerful. Furthermore, there were more than 30 peak stage Saint King level mountain bandits, which had far exceeded the 10 that Wu Jing had said. It was too dangerous for just Ling Han and the Empress to barge into this kind of tiger's den. Captain, The strength of this band of mountain bandits is far above what the information that we have gotten predicted. There is no need for us to be forceful. It would be better to bring this information back, and we would definitely be accorded merit and not faulted for it. That's right, Captain. You have to think it through carefully before you act. Everyone advised. By now they were all sincerely siding with Ling Han. This captain and his wife were too fierce. Who knew, maybe after a few tens of thousands or a few million years, they would become severing mundane tears, and their present-day friendship would be too valuable by then. Ling Han smiled yet shook his head resolutely. He was definitely going to the mountain bandits' lair. What? It was very simple. How many traveling merchants had this band of mountain bandits robbed? Furthermore, all of them had been robbed completely, and they had accumulated a great volume of wealth in a short few years' time. If he were to raid them now, then everything would be his. What benefits would merely reporting information bring him? He and the Empress set out. The three mountain bandits had already confessed the exact location of the mountain bandits' lair, so Ling Han and the Empress only had to travel according to the set route. With their present strength, they no longer feared any kind of trap or ambush. No matter what tricks the mountain bandits had, they could suppress all of them. The mountain path was difficult to walk, and if they chose to fly in the skies, the path would be covered by the dense forest, which would make it easy for them to lose their way. Thus, they spent slightly less than half a day's time to finally arrive at the bandits' stronghold. If they had not had the information that was given by those three mountain bandits, this place would have been really difficult to find. It was very covert. It was no wonder that even when large groups of traveling merchants hired a large number of elites to suppress them, it had been useless. The entrance to this mountain bandits' lair was especially secretive, and was between two rocks. One had to contract their build first to be able to squeeze in, and after they were through, they would immediately come up to a wide clearing. A massive valley appeared in front of them, and there was a great tree growing in the middle of the valley. The tree's huge crown had spread out, covering the whole valley completely. Thus, one would need a large amount of luck to discover the presence of this valley if he did not go through that previous passage. When they appeared, they immediately drew the attention of all the mountain bandits. We have intruders. I am about to die. How could this woman be so beautiful? Because only Ling Han was here, the Empress had removed her face veil, revealing her exquisite beauty, and true enough, this caused all the mountain bandits to stare besottedly at her. They didn't even know who they were anymore. Ling Han grinned menacingly. His fingers balled into a fist and then opened up again. Shua, he had shot out over a dozen flashes of sword chi. Piu piu. Immediately, 11 mountain bandits collapsed, their blood pooling onto the ground. In the celestial realm, Genesis tears were not considered much at all. Thus, no matter how many of them died, it would not cause the heaven and earth to grieve over their loss. Only when celestial kings died would it cause grief throughout the world. This entrance had a total of 12 mountain bandits, and there was still a perverted grin on the face of the only mountain bandit that remained alive, yet he suddenly broke into cold shivers and screamed in horror. He turned around and escaped, and as he ran he released shouts of utmost terror, which instantly echoed throughout the entire valley. Ling Han had deliberately left a survivor so that he could draw out all the mountain bandits. He had not been merciful. This band of mountain bandits were too ruthless. They left no survivors every time they launched a raid. If any women fell into their hands, then their fate might as well have been death. They would suffer all kinds of torture before they would be killed. There was no need to have mercy on these animals. Very soon, mountain bandits came out of their stone and wooden huts one after another, every single one of them wielding weapons and appearing incredibly fierce. Those who would become mountain bandits were basically those that had broken the law in the city, or might have been good people before, but were forced into the thieves' den by evil tyrants. However, after becoming mountain bandits, every single person here had buried their conscience, and did not shrink from committing any crime. Even if they had originally been good people, they would still lose themselves amidst bloodshed and slaughter, and their psyche would be distorted. They thought that they had suffered injustice and would seek their revenge on innocents. What a beautiful woman! When they saw the Empress, every single mountain bandit was staring at her. The Empress's beauty could conquer all, and even in a situation in which she was the enemy, her beauty was capable of making everyone feel carefree and relaxed. Ling Han smiled faintly and said, "The wife is mine, so you guys need not think about it. Which of you is Jiang Wushang? Come out and receive your death." Haha, A minor character like you thinks you can alert our boss? A middle-aged man walked out. He was a deputy chief of the mountain bandits, and could be considered a big shot even among peak stage Saint Kings with his strength. He had also been tempered through innumerable years. It was easy to advance into the Genesis tier in the celestial realm, and it was also easy to reach the consummate level of the Genesis tier. Then they would have a long 4 billion years to temper their strength. Though most people were unable to survive the increasingly frightening Immortals' tribulation, for those who could live more than 2 billion years, which of them did not possess incredibly strong abilities? The intruders were merely two great saints, and they actually dared to come here and mess around? Ha, brat, have you come to present your wife as a gift? As this deputy boss spoke, it also caused the other mountain bandits to erupt in loud laughter. Pooh! Suddenly, blood spurted from his chest, spraying into the mouths of a few mountain bandits beside him who were still laughing and covering their faces. These people immediately stopped laughing as they watched this deputy boss of theirs slowly slide onto the ground with an expression of horror, a smile still present on his features. Chapter 1684, Jiang Wushang. A big shot among peak stage Saint Kings was actually insta-killed. Ling Han withdrew his fingers, smiled calmly and declared, "Jiang Wushang, come out and meet me." All the mountain bandits exchanged looks, and the remaining several deputy chiefs all had menacing expressions as they declared, "We move together. Kill the man and capture the woman alive." Though they could feel that this was problematic, none of them could bear to kill the Empress. If such an exquisite beauty were to die, that would really be a great pity. However, there was no need for them to be so polite towards Ling Han. Boom! At least a few hundred mountain bandits leaped up, and launched an offensive against Ling Han. They had used their full strength and multiple silvery rivers appeared, stars forming and destroyed within them. Multiple regulations appeared. After all, these mountain bandits had all reached the Genesis tier. Those that did not manage this were not even qualified to join them. Die. The Empress humphed and her 9 doppelgangers appeared, releasing various powerful techniques. Divine light burst out and dazzled the entire valley, and every streak of light was fatal and deadly. Ling Han moved as well. Boom! A ball of flame burst out from within his body. It was like the flames of extermination, and was also like a cleansing flame that could cleanse all darkness and filth to welcome a new world. The 9 Heavens Flame. As Ling Han's cultivation level increased, the might of the 9 Heavens Flame had also become gradually stronger. This was one of the 9 great ancestral flames of the celestial realm, so how domineering was it? Boom! As the 9 Heavens Flame rolled out over them, the mountain bandits only managed to release a terrible scream before they were immediately burnt into ashes one after another. Flee! Flee for your lives. It was only a few attacks and all the mountain bandits' faces turned green as they all turned around and fled. This couple was practically like demons and could not be matched. Virtue has its reward and evil has its retribution. This is the natural cycle of karma. Ling Han's hand stretched out, and the 9 Heavens Flame wove a giant net above the valley, stopping every single mountain bandit from fleeing, while he and the Empress stood guard at the only land passage into the valley. They were planning to block their retreat and destroy them. We'll give it our all. The mountain bandits' eyes had all turned bloodshot and they charged back. This time they no longer went easy on the Empress, and even she became a target of their frenzied attacks. Compared with their lives, so what if she was an exquisite fairy? They were all desperate criminals, not romantics. Unfortunately, the power gap was really too wide, so even if they gave it their all, so what? This was a one-sided massacre, and neither Ling Han nor the Empress showed them any mercy. Ling Han despised these mountain bandits for their various acts of evil, and the Empress considered everyone else below her notice. Aside from Ling Han and those connected to Ling Han, any living being in this world was the same to her, as if they were only stray dogs. Killing these mountain bandits was just like killing a few ants to her, so what need was there for her to feel any kind of emotion? This massacre only lasted for 15 minutes, and all the mountain bandits were executed. Even the several deputy chiefs collapsed at the first strike. Pa 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 pa. And it was at this moment that a round of applause was heard. A scholar dressed in black walked out of a bamboo house. His complexion was very fair and his features were very delicate. He appeared to be in his 30s. Jiang Wushang. Ling Han asked. That would be me. The black-robed scholar nodded and appeared to be very bookish. Ling Han was slightly surprised. As he saw it, the leader of this band of vicious and fierce mountain bandits should be a coarse, rough barbarian. No matter what, he could not connect that image with this cultured scholar in front of him. Judging by your strength, I should not be able to survive this disaster today. However, before you make your move, I hope that the two of you can listen to my story. Jiang Wushang bowed towards the two of them. Ling Han was also quite curious himself and said, "Please go on." Jiang Wushang gathered his thoughts for a while, and then said, "Actually, I cannot be considered a cultivator. I have always been engrossed in the research of ancient history, and married a gentle, beautiful wife, who birthed me an adorable son. Though I have always been praised by others to be talented in cultivation, I truthfully disliked the acts of violence and murder very much. However..." He paused and fury burst from his eyes. "I went out one day to discuss the missing parts of history with a friend, and when I returned home, I discovered that my wife and son had both died. I almost went mad, and after I calmed down, I found a great many people going by the few clues that were left, and only then did I find out that it was a profligate son of the Ding clan that coveted my wife's beauty, and wanted to use force against her. My wife would rather die than bend to his will, and was beaten to death by his hands. To vent his fury, he even threw my son who had only been 3 years old then and killed him. I went to seek my revenge, yet was unable to even enter through the main doors of the Ding clan before I was beaten half dead. I was thrown outside the city, and allowed to rot so that only bones would remain. At first I was definitely dead, but the heavens spared me. A sweet fountain actually erupted from underground and healed my injuries. I know that the Ding clan is too powerful, and I would not be able to avenge myself ever in this lifetime. Hence, I became a bandit, and if any group of traveling merchants came out from Dark Moon City, I would eradicate all of them to make some trouble for the Ding clan." This. Ling Han sighed internally. Jiang Wushang's experience was indeed very tragic and pitiful, but for the sake of causing some pain to the Ding clan, he had killed who knew how many innocents, and who knew how many women had suffered the same fate as his wife. This man's heart had already been completely distorted by his vengeance. Ling Han paused and said, "You are already a peak stage Saint King, and your talent is extraordinary. Why did you not attempt to advance into the severing mundane tier? At least you would have a sliver of hope of getting your revenge." Jiang Wushang stared at the skies and showed a gentle smile. He answered, "What I cannot bear to part with the most is my love towards my wife and son, but if this first severance of severing mundane tier is dealt, I would have to sever this love of mine. In that case I would rather remain incapable of getting this revenge. Severing mundane tier, dealing a strike onto your own self to sever the mortal bond that was most important to you. But mortals were mortals because they could not let go of various things, so how could this strike that separated mortality and immortality be dealt so easily?" Jiang Wushang was undoubtedly a sentimental person. For the sake of not forgetting the love for his wife and son, he did not even attempt to break through to the severing mundane tier, and even abandoned his vengeance. Ling Han sighed and said, "Jiang Wushang, your crime is too heavy and I have no choice but to kill you. However, I can promise you that there will come a day that I will eradicate the Ding clan and give you justice." Jiang Wushang laughed loudly and said, "Whether the two of you are able to succeed or not, I will first thank you. This is my final battle, so allow me, a person who despises battle, to have a brilliant fight, and bring an end to my life after I have given it my all." He gave a light shout, and a frightening aura surged out of his body, strong enough to make even a peak stage Saint King tremble. "When I was in the Eternal River tier, I had formed 6 million stars. If it were not for the fact that I really had no interest in cultivation, it was possible that I could aim for 8 million or even the pinnacle of 10 million stars," Jiang Wushang stated calmly. "Thus, the two of you must not be careless. If you were killed by me, ho-ho?" Ling Han gave the Empress a look and said, "I'll be the one." Though Jiang Wushang's crime was heavy, he could still be considered a man, so it should be he who sent him on his final journey. The Empress nodded gently and stepped aside. Chapter 1685, A Scroll That Could Not Be Opened. "Charge!" Jiang Wushang shouted loudly. He charged out, each of his hands becoming a sun, and shooting forth endless rays of light. He was a natural prodigy of cultivation. Even if he had not spent much effort on cultivation, his battle prowess was still frighteningly high. Every strike could cause the heaven and earth to pale. If he had been in the ancient realm, he could have destroyed a great star with a single breath. It had to be known that even if a small saint wanted to destroy a star, he would have to take a long time to build up enough power for a strong attack, so what kind of concept being capable of shattering a star with a single breath was? But in front of Ling Han, this was still insufficient. Putting aside the fact that Ling Han's battle prowess was invincible among the Genesis tiers, even if he did not fight back, how could Jiang Wushang manage to overcome his physique? However, Ling Han did not rush to attack. This was Jiang Wushang's final battle. He decided to let the latter unleash his full battle prowess, and end his life after he had fully expended himself. Jiang Wushang had absolutely no thought of loss or victory. He only wanted to fully display all the comprehension that he had accumulated in this lifetime, and with his strength, he could have eradicated this entire thieves' den all by himself, which was proof of how extraordinarily strong his battle prowess was. It was clear that he rarely fought. His every move was incredibly shaky, but this time his only thought was fighting. With his talent, he swiftly washed away the shakiness of his techniques, and became proficient at them and merciless. Even Ling Han had the thought of treasuring his talent, but he forcibly suppressed this urge. Boom! The nine heavens flame leaped out, and as lightning flash was used, he confronted him directly. The tide of the ages could age all attacks, and his fist landed on Jiang Wushang's chest. Boom! The fist penetrated his heart and came out through the other side, yet not a single trace of blood could be seen on his fist. With the burning of the nine heavens flame, what blood could possibly be left? Jiang Wushang coughed up blood. He looked at Ling Han and the light in his eyes dimmed, but a smile of relief broke out on his lips. Even he hated this kind of himself, but he did not dare to commit suicide, as his powerful hatred continuously castigated him. His lashing back at others so madly was in fact an attempt to seek his own death, hoping that an elite would appear and make the move he could not and take his life for him. In this way he would be able to reunite with his wife and son in the underworld. If there was a next life, they could become husband and wife, father and son once more. The nine heavens flame burned furiously, turning Jiang Wushang into ashes, which returned back to nature. Ling Han was slightly silent for a moment, then turned around and grinned at the Empress. "We'll do some gathering and then go home." "And?" The Empress nodded. Because she only had Ling Han in her eyes, she naturally would not be emotionally affected by Jiang Wushang's story and death, but the phrase, "go home," immediately turned her into a tender little woman. The two of them gathered all the treasures in the mountain bandits' lair. There were a great number of alchemical pills, silk fabrics, saintly materials and saintly medicines. When they found any godly metal, Ling Han would directly have the divine demon sword swallow them, and when they finished their rounds, the divine demon sword had actually advanced. Level 19. As expected, there were bountiful resources in the celestial realm, and it was considerably easy for it to reach level 20. But from godly metal to divine metal, every step was incredibly hard to take. Not only did the divine demon sword have to swallow a large volume of level 20 godly metal, it also needed to survive a test from the heaven and earth. Celestial tools were equivalent to being celestial king tier level, so how could it be so easily reachable? "Ling Han, come take a look at this thing," the Empress called out from nearby. This was where the mountain bandits stored their treasures. Some items had been divided among them, but most of the treasures were still dumped here, and had not been stored away in spatial tools. The Empress held a scroll in her hand. It was completely black and was heavy in her grip. It was incredibly hard. This was definitely not paper, but rather was woven from the combination of some kind of animal fur and metallic thread. From the outside, the scroll was visibly rolled up in layers, and was finally tied up with a sash, but it could not be opened at all. It was like this was not a sash, but rather something that had been melded together with the scroll. No matter how much effort Ling Han put in, he could do nothing to it. Ling Han and the Empress exchanged a look, and could see the surprise in each other's eyes. This must have been made by an elite. It may only be a letter, but if one's level is not enough, you would not even be qualified to open it for a look, Ling Han said. It should be known that he was already the strongest elite beneath the severing mundane tier, yet was not qualified to even open a scroll for a look. The two of them did everything they could, but were still unable to succeed. "We'll keep it away first." Ling Han wanted to throw the scroll into the Black Tower, yet discovered, much to his surprise, that this could not be done, because he was unable to use his divine sense to wrap around this scroll. To use an analogy, his divine sense was like a net, and this scroll was like a heavy object that was trapped in the fishing net. It was so heavy that if he drew in the net, it would break through the net mesh and fall out. He could only keep the scroll on him, and his plans of using the Black Tower to open the scroll had failed. However, they really had a great harvest this time, and had gained more than 100 saintly medicines. If the mountain bandits had not expended them greatly, this number would have been far higher, and additionally, they also obtained a great amount of godly metal, but it had been swallowed by the divine demon sword. And there were also more than 1,000 star stones. They could help in the comprehension of Tao, as well as large amounts of satin fabrics, which had been woven from the silk of Genesis tier-level demonic beasts. They were on the level of saintly material, and if they were used to make clothing, its defense would definitely be good. Ling Han was very satisfied. He would have been even happier if he had not heard Jiang Wushang's tragic story, but this strengthened his resolve to raise the Ding clan to the ground. Whether it was in the ancient realm or the celestial realm, Ling Han had not heard that the Ding clan had produced any kind of good people. What he had heard and experienced personally was all the Ding clan's domineering and overbearing nature. Ling Han and the Empress returned, and when everyone found out that the whole mountain bandits' lair had been destroyed by just the two of them, they erupted in loud cheers. Naturally, no one would insensibly talk about the spoils of the battle. On their way back, they publicly flew the banner of the Dark Moon Army, so they naturally did not have to pay any entrance fee when they entered into the city. They were directly allowed to pass and return to the army camp. Ling Han went to report the combat results to Wu Jing. He skipped the details and only said that this group of mountain bandits was really too weak, and they had easily wiped them out. Only 7 of their team of 100 had suffered light injuries, and not only were there no deaths, there were even no major injuries. This kind of military success stunned Wu Jing. He personally inspected the team himself, and looked at the large amount of corpses and weapons that they had brought back. There was no evidence more solid than this. He went to report to Jianghu, but a command was passed down only after a short while, demanding that Ling Han hand over all the spoils of their battle. The reason was that they were the losses of Dark Moon City, and naturally had to be confiscated. When Ling Han heard this, he almost slammed his fist on the table. Why were so many people willing to join the Dark Moon Army? Aside from the fact that they had a chance to rise up above the others, the reason was that whatever spoils that they obtained in any battles that they participated in were theirs. Oh, and now that it was his turn, the rule had changed and they had to be confiscated. Utter crap. It was that vile Jianghu again. Flames of rage flickered in Ling Han's eyes. With the wealth of Jianghu and the Ding clan, they naturally would not value this little bit of profit from the mountain bandits' lair. This was Jianghu's deliberate scheme to make trouble for him. Hey, he was a great severing mundane tier. Did he really feel unembarrassed to target a Genesis tier like this? Did he even want any face? Yet, what happened afterwards was a completely unexpected turn of events. Jianghu had actually been transferred away, and his replacement was a vice commander from the Long clan whose name was Long Gaofei. Chapter 1686, Great Commander Mao. Ling Han immediately went to seek out Mao Shuyu. There was only one person that could influence the transfer of vice commanders, and furthermore it was a transfer between 2 different factions. Mao Dai, Great Commander Mao. That's right. I was the one who reported the situation to Father. Mao Shuyu nodded. She indignantly declared, "No need to thank me. I just don't like that guy. Tui, and he is a so-called severing mundane ancestor? To actually act like such a bully." Ling Han chuckled and said, "I still have to thank you for doing me such a huge favor." "All right. Father said that if you have time, pay him a visit," Mao Shuyu continued. Ling Han paused. He was beaten down on by Jianghu, making it so that no one was willing to get involved with him. If it had not been because of the rules, he would have more or less been a commanding officer that had no army. He would only have one soldier under his command, that was the Empress, and they would have become a husband and wife army. But even so, he had still been ostracized. Just like Jianghu had said previously, every captain would be rewarded with 10 star stones, and the other 9 had all obtained their rewards, and he was the only one who had not. Could he go and ask for his reward from Jianghu? He would definitely be humiliated by the latter. Even if Ling Han had shown powerful strength in the previous mission to suppress the mountain bandits, and won the respect of his subordinates, when they returned to the army camp, everyone automatically separated themselves from him. There was nothing that could be done about it. Who would dare draw the notice of a severing mundane ancestor? Perhaps Ling Han would succeed one day, but from the Genesis tier to severing Mundane tier, even the most awesome person would need tens of millions of years to accumulate strength. Could Ling Han really manage to survive such a long period of time? But right at this moment, Mao Dai actually asked Ling Han to pay him a visit. Though he said that it was just a visit, it was also a show for the others, it implied. I, Mao Dai, am optimistic about this brat's future. Who was Mao Dai? A third Severance elite and an awesome character that could very possibly advance into the fourth Severance. If he supported Ling Han fully, what was Dinghu worth? How could it be that the Ding clan would become hostile with Mao Dai because of this issue, and push him towards the other two great clans? Ling Han smiled slightly and said, there is no better day than today, so let's just make it today. Sure. Mao Shiyu nodded. Come with me. Father is also very curious about you. He keeps feeling that I have been exaggerating and that you are not that strong. The two of them exited the campgrounds. At first they would not have been able to leave so directly, but Mao Shiyu's identity was special, so she could simply throw out Mao Dai's name to open doors for her, scaring the various military instructors into a daze, and they could only let them go. Ding, who was suddenly replaced. Anyone could guess that this was Mao Dai's doing. Since Lord Mao's eyes were already cast in this direction, whose heart would not tremble? This was a third Severance elite, and furthermore one that had boundless future prospects. In future he could advance into the fourth Severance, and be an equal to the ancestors of the three great clans, becoming one of the strongest of Dark Moon City. Mao Dai naturally was overseer in the Dark Moon Army, and not this small camp of reserve troops. There were a total of 9,000 people in the whole Dark Moon Army, 3,000 in each of the three armies: Azure Dragon Army, White Tiger Army, and Vermilion Bird Army. Additionally, there were around 100 substitute troops. Because there would be losses every year in the Dark Moon Army, it was necessary to get replacements from these substitute troops, and the source of the substitute troops was naturally the reserve troops. These substitute troops were under the jurisdiction of Xiaochen. He was Mao Dai's sole disciple, and had long since reached peak stage Saint King tier. It was said that he had a chance of breaking through to the severing Mundane tier, and was waiting for the opening of the mortality barrier pool to use the Tao of heaven and earth there to sever his mortal bonds. Mao Shiyu brought Ling Han into the army camp. The people here clearly recognized her and nodded in acknowledgement when they saw her. They did not even ask any questions. True, Ling Han was only a great saint. How could it be that anyone would worry that he would dare to mess around here? There was a courtyard in the army camp. It did not look very big from the outside, yet it was a completely different world inside. There were mountains and lakes, and it was a utopia. This was a spatial god tool, just that the god tool itself was larger and had been built in the form of a courtyard. Junior sister. A person was seated at the entrance. When he saw Mao Shiyu approach, he immediately bounced up, and looked at Ling Han with eyes filled with warning, brimming with a hidden meaning. This woman is mine, so don't attempt to take her from me. This man was Xiaochen, the only disciple of Mao Dai. Senior brother? Mao Shiyu greeted sweetly. She saw this senior brother as her actual brother. Because her father had always focused on cultivation, it could be claimed that the time Xiaochen spent with her was even more than what time Mao Dai had spent with her. Ling Han also smiled and said, "Greetings, brother Jiang." Xiaochen showed a sliver of displeasure. "You are merely a great saint, yet I am a saint king. Even if you do not address me as a senior, you should still call me Lord Jiang, right?" "Is father cultivating?" Mao Shiyu asked. "He just finished cultivating and is presently drinking tea." Xiaochen looked towards Mao Shiyu, his displeased expression immediately turning into a doting smile. "You're in luck, go in then," Mao Shiyu said to Ling Han, and then said to Xiaochen, "Senior brother, I encountered a problem in my cultivation. Come with me and give me some advice." At first, Xiaocheng's heart was filled with displeasure, but when he heard Mao Shiyu's words, this sliver of displeasure immediately vanished without a trace. "What problem?" Ling Han smiled. He could tell that not only Xiaochen liked Mao Shiyu, even Mao Shiyu was filled with affection towards this senior brother of hers, just that this girl was a little slow in the matters of love, and had not realized it at all. He entered into the courtyard and there was a twisting and bending water gallery. A large lake rippled with light, and there was a mountain in the distance and shrouded in mist, looking like it was a paradise. Further away, a man was presently sitting and fishing as he sipped tea, appearing to be incredibly relaxed. Ling Han walked over and arrived behind that man. With clasped hands he greeted, "Ling Han greets senior, And this was Mao Dai. It was merely a rear view, and he was like a mountain that could not be moved. Anyone could only look up at him in his presence. This was a third Severance elite. He really was close to merging with the heavenly Tao, and was indescribably strong. Mao Dai did not make a sound. After a long while he raised his fishing rod, and a massive water snake had been tugged out of the water surface, but Ling Han shockingly saw that the water snake had horns and legs. This was no snake but rather a dragon. A true dragon could be ranked as one of the strongest divine beasts in the ancient realm, but was really more or less a water snake in front of this elite. It was easily hooked up by him. He removed it from the fishing hook and casually tossed it back into the giant lake. He smilingly said, "You mischievous little guy, just how much fishing bait of mine have you eaten knowing that I would not wound you?" The true dragon flipped out of the water surface, creating splashes as if responding to him. Immediately, it then sank back into the water and disappeared in the blink of an eye. This was a true dragon, but it really was very small. In the ancient realm, a true dragon would only have to grow naturally, and it was a natural Genesis tier, but in the celestial realm, this overall level had increased further. It was already a Genesis tier even when it was only an immature dragon, and if it matured, it was possible that it could be severing mundane tier or even stronger than that. The problem was that this was not something that could be resolved with mere bloodline. It would have to go to a specific place in the celestial realm to sever its mortal bonds. Additionally, it was the same for when it advanced into the dividing soul tier, immortal palace tier, and so on. It could only break through at a specific location in the celestial realm. Only then did Mao Dai turn around. Instantly, it was like the whole universe had descended. What Ling Han saw was definitely not a single person, but rather the Tao of heaven and earth. It was only an instant and this feeling vanished. Mao Dai stood, his arms crossed behind his back. His black robes fluttered. He was not tall and was more on the leaner side, giving off a scholarly vibe. "Young man, you are very extraordinary," Mao Dai said. Chapter 1687. What is severing mundane tier? You are very extraordinary. This was not a compliment from just anyone, but the assessment of a third severance elite. Ling Han was neither haughty nor humble and said, "Senior is flattering me." Mao Dai smiled and replied, "There is no need to be modest. Being overly modest is equivalent to being proud." Ling Han smiled as well and responded, "This junior is indeed very extraordinary. I have not encountered anyone that can match me among my peers yet." Mao Dai couldn't help but be surprised, then laughed loudly and said, "Ha, you are quite interesting, very interesting." He paused and then continued, "So far, there was only one youth who could speak so frankly and with such confidence before me. That is because senior is amiable, so this junior dares to be frank," Ling Han said. Mao Dai extended a finger to tap at Ling Han. "This flattery is quite good, it is pleasing to me." He walked, his arms still crossed behind him, and said, "Come and walk with me." Ling Han set out behind him. Naturally, it was impossible that he would walk side by side with Mao Dai. Instead, he followed a small step behind him. "You only broke through to the Genesis tier after reaching 10 million stars, right?" Mao Dai asked suddenly. Ling Han hesitated slightly and replied, "Yes." Mao Dai had already shown him benevolence. Furthermore, it was very unwise to play any kind of tricks in such an elite. Mao Dai's figure paused slightly, and then immediately went back to normal. He said, "I never thought that I, Mao Dai, would have been able to meet a prodigy that had genuinely cultivated to the pinnacle level of the eternal river tier. Young man, I take back my previous assessment. You are not very extraordinary but rather extremely extraordinary." This assessment was really very high, extraordinary and outstanding. Ling Han only smiled in response. Since Mao Dai already told him not to be modest, he would not be reserved. He was indeed very awesome. In a battle of equals, only the male and female saints that had come out of major sects could be a match for him, the kind like Hunyo. "Young man, do you know what is severing mundane?" Mao Dai suddenly changed the topic. Severing mundane? Wasn't it severing one's mortal bonds? Ling Han pondered for a moment and then said, "That is dealing a strike to oneself, to sever one's most precious and valuable relations." Mao Dai nodded and then continued, "Heavenly Tao is cold and merciless. If one wants to attain immortality, one must pay a price. In the past, what I most valued was my wife and daughter, but after dealing 3 strikes to myself, no matter how earnestly I try to remember now, I cannot regain those previous emotions that I had once held towards my wife and daughter. This was sorrowful. It was clear that his love had once been so deep, but now he could not even remember that previous emotion that he had once felt, because he had already severed this relation himself and nothing was left of it. Now Ling Han could slightly understand why Jiang Wushang would rather give up any hope of achieving revenge than to break through to the severing mundane tier. That was because from a certain aspect, after severing the mundane, he would no longer be who he had once been. This is my eternal regret, and I will never be able to compensate for it. Mao Dai sighed, then turned to look at Ling Han and said, "Young man, is there anything that you value and are unwilling to part with?" "Yes." Ling Han nodded without hesitation. There had to be some other way that he could sever some relations that he did not value that much with this strike. Mao Dai looked at Ling Han and then slowly said, "Some people do not wish to sever what they value the most, and deliberately did some tricks to their memory, turning themselves into another person, and fall in love with another, wanting to use this relation as replacement when they step into the severing mundane tier. However, in front of the Tao of heaven and earth, cultivators have to face their true selves. No matter what kind of schemes you resort to, it is all pointless effort. To break through to the severing mundane tier, it is necessary to sever the mortal bond that binds you the most." Ling Han's figure involuntarily trembled. There were too many people that he valued, and all of them were memories that he was unwilling to sever. Mao Dai saw Ling Han's expression become grim, smiled and said, "Mortals all think that the severing mundane tier means dealing a blow to oneself, yet do not know that there is another path of severing mundane that the blow is not dealt to himself." Ling Han immediately became excited and said, "Senior, please guide me." He bowed fully. If there was a way for him to advance into the severing mundane tier without striking himself, then these words from Mao Dai today would be more valuable than a celestial king technique. Mao Dai smiled gladly and said, "Striking oneself is only a minor Tao, and the true path of strength would be striking the heaven and earth." Striking heaven and earth. Ling Han's mouth gaped slightly. Severing mundane meant severing one's mortal bonds and merging with the Tao of heaven and earth, but if he turned around and struck heaven and earth, how was he going to merge with the Tao of heaven and earth? It was more likely that he would be rejected. Mao Dai explained, "Striking the heaven and earth, this was something that I saw in an ancient site. Years ago, there was a supreme prodigy that became a severing mundane tier by striking the heaven and earth, and did not borrow any power from the heaven and earth. All he depended on was his own strength. I myself am the heaven, and I myself am the earth, and what I say is fact." Hearing the last few words, Ling Han couldn't help but feel fired up. This was the path of strength that he had been pursuing all this while. But striking oneself is already very difficult, what more dealing a strike to the heaven and earth? Mao Dai's expression became serious. Furthermore, dealing a strike to the heaven and earth means that you would definitely experience a backlash from the heaven and earth. Even if you successfully dealt out this strike, the chances of your death would be extremely high. Ling Han's expression was determined and he answered, "Senior, thank you for showing me the right path. I still feel that I can try out this alternative path." Mao Dai nodded and said, "You are a true prodigy. I am unwilling to have you experience the same regrets that I have, and at the same time wish that you can surpass me and become stronger. Breaking through to the Genesis tier at the pinnacle of Eternal River tier, and becoming a severing mundane tier, you would only be invincible among your peers at most." This so-called peers is referring to the first severance against the first severance, second severance against second severance. However, if you can advance into the severing mundane tier on this basis, then you will be invincible even in a tier-surpassing battle. This was unimaginable. Having just advanced into the first severance, he would be able to kill even a peak stage second severance elite. But just how many people were capable of this in the celestial realm? Merely the pinnacle level of the Eternal River tier had trapped who knew how many people, and added with the fact that one would have to strike the heaven and earth, even if he managed to successfully deal this strike, most people would not be able to survive the backlash from the heaven and earth. Only a true king tier could accomplish this kind of glorious feat. As far as I know, there are a total of 7 mystery realms that one can advance into the severing mundane tier near Dark Moon City, and the Mortality Barrier Pool is the location that would open the soonest. It is also where the power of heaven and earth is strongest, and going by my calculations, it should be enough to support you to strike at the heaven and earth. However, the Mortality Barrier Pool will open 2 years later, and this bit of time is far from enough to allow you to reach the peak stage of Saint King tier, and accumulate enough comprehension at the same time. And the next time the mortality barrier pool opens would be 10 million years later. Mao Dai shook his head, appearing to feel that it was a pity. To deal a strike to the heaven and earth would require a stronger power from the heaven and earth, and only the mortality barrier pool suited their requirements, but this little bit of time was really not enough. However, after you reach the peak stage of Saint King tier, you can travel around. The celestial realm is too big, and there must be a mystery realm for severing mundane tier that can compare to the mortality barrier pool. Ling Han thanked him again. This information might only have been nonsense to others, even if they knew that there was a way to avoid striking themselves, so what? It was impossible that they could manage to deal a strike to the heaven and earth. But for Ling Han, this was too valuable, and had resolved a huge problem that he had been constantly worrying about. Go on. Mao Dai waved him off, and after a pause he added, if you have any kind of trouble, you can come look for me. It was clear how high an opinion he had of Ling Han from these words. Ling Han bowed and thanked him. However, though Mao Dai had already said such, Ling Han was definitely not the type to come and trouble him at every sign of a problem. You really thought that he had nothing else to do? This could only be used at the most crucial moment. Chapter 1688, Representative. Ling Han returned, and when he related these words from Mao Dai to the Empress, she was immediately incredibly overjoyed. What she valued the most was naturally her relationship with Ling Han, and that was something that she could not possibly sever, and this filled her with resolve to rather never advance into the severing mundane tier, and be in love with Ling Han until the end of her life. However, in an unexpected turn of events, there was actually an alternative. Striking the heaven and earth was definitely more difficult than dealing a strike to oneself, and the difficulty level was possibly not just a little bit harder, but rather 10 times to over 100 times higher, but she would be able to preserve the emotions she had for Ling Han, and would also be capable of surpassing any ordinary severing mundane tier in terms of battle prowess. To the incredibly proud Empress, this was her only choice and was also the best choice for her. Without Dinghu there, Ling Han's days naturally became considerably better than before, but there were also many people that were very cautious, and still maintained a distance from Ling Han who knew they might have to join the White Tiger Army in future, right? Their training continued, but only 5 days later Ling Han, Mao Shuyu and the others were all gathered. Aside from Ding Xiaochen who was not a captain, the other 9 were all captains. Long Gaofei was seated, and he cast his eye on the gathered 10 and said, I have gathered you today to inform you that you all will be participating in a tournament, and your opponent will be a team from the Azure Dragon Army, White Tiger Army and Vermilion Bird Army. Tu Kong. He paused and looked to his side. You will be in charge of explaining the subsequent details. Yes, sir. Tu Kong agreed respectfully first, and only then did he begin his explanation. As it turned out, there were a total of 237 one-star cities under the jurisdiction of the Black Moon sect, and every few hundred or thousand years or so, they could have these forces under their reign form a team of 10 members to participate in a tournament in Black Moon City, and this was only limited to the Genesis tier. This was the so-called chance for entering into the Dark Moon Army, and if one could rise above the others and gain the recognition of some higher-up of the Black Moon sect, they would have a chance of staying in a 2-star city. In future, it was possible that they might even have a chance of going to a 3-star city, and gain the notice of the Fu clan. However, it would usually be 3 teams of official troops battling directly. After drawing lots, one of the teams would be skipped over, while the 2 teams that had been drawn would battle first, and the victor would be fighting the team that had been passed over. This final victor would then be able to represent Dark Moon City, and participate in the tournament. This time, for the sake of fairness, they decided to add another team, but it was very obvious that if any of the 3 teams of official troops drew Ling Han and his group, they clearly had a massive advantage on their side. Would the official troops be unable to defeat the reserve troops? Ling Han naturally would not think that. Perhaps there were prodigies among prodigies in the official troops, but what would they be worth against him? Too bad the Empress could not participate. This time they only chose the captains of the 10 teams. Then why could Ding Xiaochen be here? The captain of his team claimed to be unwell, so Ding Xiaochen managed to replace him. Claiming to be unwell? It must have only been the Ding clan using threats and rewards to compel that person to give up his place. If they could win and represented the Dark Moon Army in the tournament, every person would be able to get 100 star stones as reward, and if they could attain a better ranking in the battles in Black Moon City, the reward would be even higher. And the three great clans had even announced that if they could get first, every person on their team would be rewarded with a 1-star pseudo-divine medal. You shouldn't think that a 1-star pseudo-divine medal was cheap. On the other hand, if one wanted to perfectly fuse two pieces of level 20 godly metal together, the price that had to be paid was huge, and it needed a severing mundane tier elite to temper it for a very long time. Moreover, it was not every severing mundane ancestor that could do it. He had to have extremely high accomplishments in the art of blacksmithing, and this ensured that any 1-star pseudo-divine medal was an incredibly valuable item. Putting aside others, even Ding Xiaochen felt greed that could not be restrained. If he could obtain a pseudo-celestial tool while he was in the Genesis tier, just how awesome would that be? He had self-awareness. It was possible that he could only advance into the severing mundane tier after more than 100 million years. Thus, the temptation of a pseudo-celestial tool was naturally massive. Otherwise, he would have to wait until he had advanced into the severing mundane tier to be bestowed with a pseudo-celestial tool by his clan. But there was a realistic problem. How were they supposed to compete with the official troops? The latter had cultivated innumerable more years than them, and were very cohesive and coordinated at that, so they were able to fully unleash the maximum battle prowess of all their members, or even higher than that. And them. It had just been a few days, so what kind of cooperation could they have managed to nurture? Furthermore, out of those that could rise above the others in the official troops, which one of them wasn't an invincible elite even among Genesis tiers? There was no end to the Genesis tier, and it was only needed to form a total of 10 billion stars, and that would mean that they had accumulated enough origin power. If their comprehension of the cultivation level was also enough, they could attempt to break through to the severing mundane tier. Thus, power was absolutely the limit before breaking through to 10 billion stars, and it was still a considerable advantage to have a few more million or billion years to cultivate. Of course, after 10 billion stars, it would be increasingly harder to form new stars, just like how every step forward was incredibly difficult after an eternal river tier had formed 1 million stars. Only a prodigy would be able to continue their triumphant progress. The gap in power and the gap in cooperation. Did they even have any hopes of emerging victorious? Even Ding Xiaochen and Mao Shuyu were shaking their heads. They were only going to be accompanying the victors, and there was no need for them to consider the possibility of winning at all. After returning to make some preparations, they set out on their journey, heading to the camp of the Dark Moon Army. Though they were only characters to accompany the victors, the other three teams were not, so it was natural that the members had to be chosen wisely. They were going to represent Dark Moon City in the tournament, and the three great clans were also very serious, wanting to get the highest possible accomplishment. From a certain aspect, this was also a display of strength of a major city, and was extremely important. The tournament would be held 3 days later, and taking advantage of these 3 days, Ling Han's team of reserve troops would also be making some last-minute preparations. Before the battles began, they still had to have a slight bit of hope that they could win. But it was only a mere 3 days. How could it possibly help them to achieve full-fledged cooperation? Putting aside other issues, merely with the conflict between Ling Han and Ding Xiaochen, it was impossible for them to achieve any kind of cooperation. 3 days later, they entered into the battlegrounds with expressions of disappointment. They could only think of this as mere procedure. The 4 teams drew lots to decide their respective opponents. Ling Han and his group were represented by Tu Kang, and the final result was that the Azure Dragon Army would face the Vermilion Bird Army, and the White Tiger Army would face the reserve troops. Seeing this kind of result, the Ding clan and the White Tiger Army all smiled. This was equivalent to them having already achieved victory. Unless the Azure Dragon Army and the Vermilion Bird Army reached some kind of agreement, if they really put everything on the line, whichever team won could only possibly be a narrow victory, and if they fought the White Tiger Army next, it was natural that they would lose. This kind of tournament could not possibly alert any powerful figures, but 3 vice commanders had still appeared, and the severing mundane tier elite of the Ding clan was Jianghu. When his eyes swept over Ling Han, a flash of killing intent flickered. A mighty severing mundane ancestor actually couldn't do anything to a mere great saint. Humph, if he did not kill this boy, what face would he have left? Begin. The 4 teams came on at the same time. There were 10 people in each team and the rules were very simple. It would be a battle royale right until all the members of one side collapsed. Let's admit defeat, Ding Xiaochen said immediately. Since their opponent was a team from his own clan, he naturally hoped that the White Tiger army could have as easy a victory as possible. Chapter 1689, Cheering On. Just when these words had left Ding Xiaochen's mouth, he was immediately on the receiving end of disdain from his companions. Was there any other person like him? He was practically a traitor. Actually, Ding Xiaochen bore a heavy responsibility for deliberately joining this team of reserve troops that could not possibly win. If they had drawn the White Tiger army as their opponent, Ding Xiaochen would advise the others to give up the idea of battle to save some effort for the White Tiger army. But if they had not drawn the White Tiger army? Then he had to attempt to drive up everyone's morale at all costs, and create as much trouble for their opponent as possible so that the White Tiger army would have increased chances of victory. Though they were destined to lose, they were still outstanding characters that had been picked from among the reserve troops, and would be sufficient to create some trouble for the official troops. Ling Han glanced disdainfully at Ding Xiaochen. If you don't want to fight, then scram. Don't be a hindrance here and affect team morale. If this had been the battleground, I would have directly removed your head. Ding Xiaochen directed a glare at Ling Han, yet did not talk back. He had suffered at Ling Han's hands once before, and knew that this guy did not only have the strength to suppress him, but would also dare to do so, so he naturally would not seek his own suffering. He ignored Ling Han and said to the others, I am saying this for your own good. Injuries are inevitable if we go up and fight. In any case we will definitely lose, so why should we make things difficult for ourselves? I have some star stones here, so does everyone have any interest? This was equivalent to public bribery. Hearing these words from him, a few captains were immediately swayed, but there were also some that were unmoved. For example, Mao Shuyu was almost close to becoming mad with fury, and Wei Bo, Qin Hinyu and Luo Xingyang were all unmoved. It was unknown whether they thought a few star stones was too paltry a sum, or they were really that upright. Scram! Ling Han said eloquently. With a soft exclamation, Ding Xiaochen's face instantly turned pale, and blood was seeping out of all his apertures. Trash from the reserve troops, will you surrender on your own volition, or would rather we give you a harsh thrashing? The 10 people from the White Tiger army all surrounded them. They were the outstanding figures of this army, and any one of them had been a peak stage Saint King for innumerable years. The number of stars they had formed was unimaginably numerous. One of them looked at Ding Xiaochen and asked, Xiaochen, are you all right? 27th uncle, I am fine. Ding Xiaochen rubbed his face. Though he said he was fine, the hint of shock in his expression was hard to conceal. Blood was actually spilling from his 7 apertures with just a soft rebuke from Ling Han. Just how wide was the gap between the two of them? At first, he thought that he could make up for this gap if he put in more effort, but from the look of things now, the gap between them was like the gap between 2 stars in the skies, and was absolutely unbridgeable. The person that Ding Xiaochen had addressed as 27th uncle was naturally also a member of the Ding clan. His name was Ding Sun, and he had already formed more than 20 billion stars. Though his comprehension of cultivation level was still at the peak stage of Saint King tier, his power was overwhelming. His talent in cultivation was actually not as high as Ding Xiaochen's. It was just that he had been born a few 100 million years earlier, and that was why his battle prowess surpassed the latter's. Ding Xiaochen was a descendant that the clan had focused on nurturing, and was the most likely person in the Ding clan to become a severing mundane ancestor, so he definitely could not meet the slightest mishap. That young man was really brazen to actually dare to harm Ding Xiaochen. Beat them as much as possible. Ding Sun declared coldly. Since the White Tiger army was under the Ding clan's jurisdiction, he naturally was the leader of this team, though his battle prowess might not be the strongest among them. The others naturally would not defy him. That was because joining the White Tiger army meant that they were part of the Ding clan. To speak more frankly, they were their lackeys. The 10 members of the White Tiger team all surrounded them. They had a cooperative technique that could unite the power of all 10 members so that every single person's battle prowess would be further increased by another 3 times at least. This was extremely frightening. In the first place, they were already excellent characters that had been chosen from among the peak stage Saint Kings, and with their battle prowess increased further by another 3 times, just how powerful could they be? A few people whose fighting spirit was not that strong immediately raised their hands in surrender, but Ding Xiaochen did not, and was putting on a pretense of fighting. However, not one member of the White Tiger team made a move to attack him. It was only a mere act. Humph. Luo Xingyang aggressively attacked. He possessed black-scaled armor as protection, so his defenses were extremely strong, so there was no better person than him to become the shield for the team. He turned into a sharp spear that penetrated right into the White Tiger team, wanting to destroy the opponent's formation. Otherwise, if every one of them had increased their battle prowess by 3 times, how were they supposed to fight them? Qin Hinyu meanwhile unleashed the power of darkness, but this celestial technique of hers did not differentiate between her allies or enemies, and would even injure her own teammates, so everyone was scared into keeping as far away from her as possible. Meanwhile, Wei Bo's figure flashed, and it was as if he could turn himself invisible. In the blink of an eye, he had already advanced a good few meters ahead, and as sword rays shot out, it was like a poisonous snake charging recklessly. Only Ling Han was standing with his arms crossed behind his back, like a pillar of support. Shwa shwa shwa. Immediately, 6 battle spears stabbed out. They were all forged from level 20 godly metal, and the points of the spears shone, exuding a frightening coldness. Ling Han shot out a fist. Ding 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 ding. He was merely using his physical body to confront these battle spears directly, and a dazzling bout of sparks shot out madly. Every punch he delivered would cause the point of a battle spear to shatter. After 6 punches, the 6 battle spears had become 6 iron staffs. Seeing this scene, all the soldiers of the Dark Moon Army that were watching the battles felt a shiver come over their bodies. What kind of physique was this? They were almost frightened to death. Being able to confront a top-grade god tool with bare hands, and it was actually the god tool that was shattered. No, this was no longer something as simple as a strong physique, but rather his battle prowess had also been strengthened to an inconceivable extent. Otherwise, he should only be capable of ensuring that he himself was unharmed. Freak. He's definitely a freak. On the high platform, the severing Mundane ancestors from the Long clan and Duan clan both opened their eyes at the same time, focusing on Ling Han. They naturally had their own informers in the reserve troops, and the 10 military instructors belonged to the 3 great clans respectively. They had also heard reports that a 3.5 stars aptitude prodigy had appeared among the reserve troops this time. The 2 great clans had already prepared their plans to entice him, and the matter of Mao Dai transferring Dinghu away also had their support. Otherwise, with the amount of control they had over the Dark Moon Army, even if Mao Dai wanted to execute this order by force, it could not have been accomplished so quickly. But only now that they had seen Ling Han's strength with their own eyes did they realize that they had still underestimated Ling Han's natural talent. Their original plans had to be abandoned. This young man was worth them paying a higher price to pull him in under their banner. Ho, the Ding clan was really funny. They were actually unwilling to pull in such a young king tier into their ranks, and instead were proactively pushing him onto their opposing side. This was practically idiotic. This was good too. Precisely because there were idiots like the Ding clan, they would have one less opponent when they competed over Ling Han in future. However, they would still have to prevent the Ding clan from harming him. After all, Genesis tier was too fragile, and if a severing Mundane tier wanted to make a move on him, then there really were 10,000 ways that he could achieve this goal. In the battlegrounds, the 10 members of the White Tiger team all received a terrible shock by Ling Han's frightening strength. Was this really a rookie soldier? Some of them had previously represented Dark Moon City to participate in the tournament at Black Moon City before, and they could only imagine that perhaps only the young prodigies of the Black Moon sect could possibly have such battle prowess. Ding Sun's eyes were poisonous and he signaled at Ding Xiaochen. The latter immediately nodded. Chapter 1690. The Plot of a Vile Character. Ding Xiaochen had a second mission. If he was unable to convince the others, he would take the job of a planted agent and stab the others in the back. I was your teammate, so would you keep your guard up against me? Ding Xiaochen stared at Ling Han's back, his eyes menacing. This man caused him utter humiliation and had to be gotten rid of. Otherwise, he would become a thorn in his heart, and that was going to be fatal when he broke through to the severing Mundane tier. Not only would it affect his breakthrough, it could even cause him to be wounded by the Great Tao. Breaking through was an incredibly dangerous thing in the first place, so how could he survive it if his Tao heart was not stable? Now that everyone was battling fiercely, How could Ling Han have possibly imagined that his teammate would turn around and attack him? Oh, he would get his revenge later? Sorry, this was a battle royale and we hadn't broken in our cooperation for many days, so wouldn't it be a very normal thing to happen if our cooperation didn't work that well? Worst came to worst, he would just have to get some punishment, but that was fine. With the interference of the Ding clan, the matter would definitely be turned into a small problem, and a small problem was no problem at all. He hadn't done it on purpose after all, right? Ding Xiaochen summoned the green wooden saber, and as a murderous aura surged, the image of a man-eating tree appeared. This was a spiritual body, but its might was not weak in the slightest. He activated it to the fullest, and when the might of the divine saber had been maximized, he suddenly struck, delivering a slash at a member of the White Tiger team. That person understood his intentions and immediately jumped towards Ling Han. In this way, this strike from Ding Xiaochen would be openly directed at Ling Han's back. When the saber light was about to reach Ling Han, only then did Ding Xiaochen loudly call out, "Watch out! Watch out, your sister!" Seeing this scene, the Vermilion Bird Army and Azure Dragon Army around them almost hurled out curses. Your acting is really too fake, isn't it? This strike is clearly heading for Ling Han directly, and you actually pretend to call out, "Watch out." They were really treating others like fools. With that little bit of distance, how was Ling Han supposed to dodge? Nobody saw that a cold smirk turned up the corners of Ling Han's lips. He had already expected that Ding Xiaochen would betray them. Otherwise, why would Ding Xiaochen have insisted on joining them when participating in this kind of tournament did not have the slightest benefit, and they would only be defeated terribly. However, with how strong Ling Han's present abilities were, even if he had not anticipated it in advance, it was still all right. Don't assume that he was fighting against 7 people all on his own, and bore the majority of the firepower of the White Tiger team with difficulty. In truth, he was still very much at ease, and had not completely displayed his full battle prowess yet. A saber strike slashed over, and the blade of the saber had yet to reach him when that tree spirit first entwined around Ling Han, wanting to devour his body and spirit. If Ling Han's spirit had been possessed, he would definitely be incapable of avoiding the upcoming strike. This was a top-grade god tool. What Saint King would be able to hold up against it? You had used your bare fists to shatter god tools, and that possibly had been that you had channeled some kind of cultivation technique to protect your fist, but if your spirit was possessed, how would you be able to channel any kind of cultivation technique? A vengeful smile appeared on Ding Xiaochen's lips. With this strike, even if Ling Han did not die, he would be severely wounded. The strike had arrived. Ling Han suddenly turned around. Clang, he stretched out his hand and took hold of the green wooden saber. A mocking smirk appeared on his lips, and he suddenly gave a shove. Ka-ka-ka. The sound of bones shattering rang out, and Ding Xiaochen's 2 arms and the bones in them had all been shattered forcefully, completely unable to resist the powerful strength that Ling Han had exerted. At this instant, Ding Xiaochen's expression was very expressive. Not only was his face filled with agony, it was also covered with shock. In his eyes, this was something that should not have happened. Ling Han wasn't defeated even like this. Pooh. The green wooden saber crashed backwards, the blunt hilt slammed onto his chest, and the sound of bones breaking rang out once more. The defense of the skin of a Saint King was rendered completely useless, and the saber's hilt directly penetrated his flesh and blood into his chest, creating a massive bloody hole. A vicious glint flashed in Ling Han's eyes, yet he did not follow it up with another strike. He calmly asked, "If you hurt others, it will eventually come back to you. Aren't you worried that if you do too many shameful deeds, ghosts will come knocking at your door at midnight?" Ding Xiaochen flopped onto the ground, his head covered with cold sweat and face as pale as paper. His heart had been burst by the green wooden saber, and large amounts of divine blood were gushing out. This caused tremendous damage to his life force, and directly affected his time of breaking through to the severing mundane tier. But if Ling Han had followed up with another punch, he presently would not have just been injured, but rather would have died. "How dare you, murderer!" Ding Hu immediately leaped to his feet, and was about to make a move to attack Ling Han. "Brother Ding Hu, what need is there to be angry?" the severing mundane tier from the Long clan Long Qingren asked calmly, but his palm had already stretched out, closing off the path of Ding Hu's move. The severing mundane ancestor from the Duan clan, Duan Wen, also stood up. He crossed his arms over his chest with a smile and said, "This is a competition, so death and injury is inevitable. Furthermore, this is only a minor injury." Minor injury? Even his heart had been burst, and this was still a minor injury? What did the heart mean for a cultivator? It was the place where blood essence was stored, and that was why there was something called heart's blood. And now that his heart had burst, his blood essence would definitely have emptied out completely, which would also cause severe damage to his life force. Jianghu's expression was livid, but with two great severing mundane ancestors clearly expressing that they would make trouble for him if he dared to move, he had no choice but to suppress his fury. If there was only one he would not be afraid, but with two severing mundane tears, ho. He sat back down heavily, lowering his eyes. Those were capable of murder. If he swept his eyes over any Genesis tear, they would only be rent into pieces. The others had also broken out in a commotion. They had not thought that there would be such a dramatic turn of events. They all thought that even if Ling Han did not die, he would be severely wounded with the strike, but it was only a blink of an eye, and the one who was heavily injured had turned into Xiaochen. If you're injured, then obediently rest on the sidelines. Ling Han shot out a kick. Xiaochen was immediately kicked out. He had turned into a ball and rolled over a dozen times before finally stopping. Xiaochen was really pitiful. He had been heavily injured in the first place, and with another blow like this, he was angry, humiliated, and pained all at the same time. He spat out a mouthful of blood and directly passed out. Ling Han looked towards the 10 members of the White Tiger team that were already dumbfounded, broke into a grin and asked, "Why are you all being so nice? Not fighting anymore?" "Being nice, your sister. Who wants to be nice to you? We were all scared by you, all right? Are you fuck really a Saint King? Are you fuck really a rookie soldier? Why do you seem to be a few hundred times stronger than even veteran soldiers?" Taking advantage of this opening when they were all dumbfounded, Mao Shuyu, Wei Bo, and the others took the chance to attack. Peng. They instantly defeated 3 of them, and the remaining 7 had lost their courage completely. As long as Ling Han was still standing there, who could match him? The White Tiger team admitted defeat. At first, the conclusion of this battle was assumed to be completely assured, and it was going to be absolutely one-sided. In truth, it had indeed been completely assured and was absolutely one-sided, but the position of victor and loser were exchanged. The reserve troops had actually defeated the official troops. Everyone's eyes were focused on Ling Han. It was this man that had single-handedly created this miracle. Jianghu's expression was dark, and his hands were balled tightly into fists. One could see there were veins popping on his forehead, and grinding sounds could be heard from his knuckles because of how tightly his hands were clenched. At this moment, his killing intent towards Ling Han had surged to the top. "We won." Mao Shuyu immediately cheered. Among the few of them, it was her personality that was the most hot-tempered and vibrant, unlike the composed Wei Bo and the others. However, this was an unexpected victory, and even Wei Bo and the others broke into slight smiles. The few team members that had wanted to surrender even before fighting all bore expressions of embarrassment, but they could not hide their exuberant joy. As long as they had Ling Han's fierce power on their side, it was completely no issue for them to represent Dark Moon City in the upcoming tournament. Chapter 1691, Fighting Azure Dragon Team. As long as they could represent Dark Moon City in the tournament, they would be able to gain a reward of 100 star stones, and if they could get a high ranking, then they would get a further reward of a 1-star pseudo-divine medal. There was hope, there really was hope. Their battle with the White Tiger team had ended too quickly. At this moment, the Azure Dragon team and Vermilion Bird team were still battling fiercely. In fact, because the battle was too fierce and tight, they did not even know what had just happened. Perhaps some of them had glimpsed that the battle on this side had already ended, but wasn't that very normal? How could the reserve team be a match for the White Tiger team? Ling Han and his group descended and rested, waiting for the victor to emerge between the Azure Dragon team and the Vermilion Bird team. This was an evenly matched battle. Both sides were very strong, and Mao Shuyu and the others would occasionally gasp at their performance. That was how fierce the battle was. Yet Ling Han felt very bored. Aside from those whose strength was not too far from his, a battle of Saint King tiers was really completely insufficient to capture his interest. They battled straight through a whole day and night, and only then did this battle finally conclude. The victor was the Azure Dragon team. The reason the Azure Dragon team managed to emerge victorious was because they had a very strong captain, the prodigy of the Duan clan, Duan Jun. Unlike Xiaochen, who had entered into the army just to court a woman, Duanjun was a born fanatic of martial arts and enjoyed battle. He had only joined the Dark Moon Army for 300,000 years, but he had fought in no less than 3 million battles, both big and small. This was equivalent to going out to fight at least every month. This frequency was astonishingly high. Yet this was the path of cultivation that was the most suited for him. In a short 300,000 years, he had already completed the transformation from a rookie of the reserve troop to a captain of the Azure Dragon Army. He was known as the top elite of the Azure Dragon Army, and the most likely person in the Duan clan to break through to the severing Mundane tier. His battle prowess was clearly superior to that of the others, but because this was a team battle, individual strength was not that important. Hence, the Azure Dragon team only managed to gain victory after going through a tough battle. He was like Ling Han, whose strength had exceeded the standards that a Saint King should have, and his individual strength was enough to overwhelm his whole team. When the Azure Dragon team found out that their next opponent was the reserve team, all of their expressions were brilliant. How was that possible? When they probed for the exact details of the battle circumstances, a strong vigilance against Ling Han naturally rose up in them. He turned the battle situation completely around with his individual strength. This was too frightening. After the Azure Dragon army rested for a while, the final battle immediately began. "All the others are trash, we just have to defeat that brat called Ling Han," Duanjun said loudly. "Though we are all weary, though our battle prowess is not at its prime, we just have to grit our teeth and victory is right in front of us. Azure Dragon, victory for all battles." The other 9 team members all called out their slogan. Under the leadership of Duanjun, the 10 of them approached. Mao Shuyu and the others automatically stood behind Ling Han. Only Ding Xiaochen was unable to participate in the battle, because his injuries were too severe. They were only left with 9 of their members. Charge. The moment Duanjun had entered into battle mode, he became mad. His eyes were bloodshot and his fighting spirit had solidified. He directly shot out, brandishing a massive battle axe in his hands, and directly delivering a strike right onto Ling Han. Behind him, his 9 teammates had all instilled their own power into Duanjun. This was a little like the power of the nation, but there was no so-called power of the nation in the celestial realm. There had never been any major sect that would draw on power of the nation, because after one had become severing Mundane tier, they would have severed their mortal bonds, so how could they have been able to draw power from mere mortals? With the power boost, Duanjun was incredibly strong. His whole body was exuding golden light, like he was an invincible god of war, and his strike had already been delivered. Ling Han stretched out a finger and tapped out at the battle axe. The whole scene seemed to have slowed down. Everyone could clearly see the battle axe descend, and his finger greet the incoming blow. Then the 2 of them clashed and the scene that had slowed down instantly froze. This time it did not just seem to, but had really frozen. Ling Han's finger had stopped the battle axe. It was just a single finger, but it was as if it was a divine metal that had existed for eons, and would not be damaged or broken. Duanjun inhaled sharply, yet suddenly released a loud roar, pushing his power to its fullest. The battle axe trembled lightly, and an eye actually opened on the body of the axe, looking towards Ling Han. This glance was like the stare of the death of God, causing a tremble in Ling Han's heart, and actually rendered him immobile. Duanjun abandoned the battle axe and shot out a punch right at Ling Han's face, wanting to take advantage of this hard-earned chance to get rid of Ling Han. And for the sake of having this battle axe open its eye, his 9 teammates that had been giving him a power boost immediately swayed and collapsed onto the ground. They had lost their battle prowess. Mao Shuyu and the others all roared out in fury and made their move. As long as they could stop Duanjun, they would definitely win, but if it was the opposite and Duanjun was successful, then without Ling Han there, even if there were still 8 of them, Duanjun would be able to deal with every single one of them. But would they make it in time? The opponent's target was extraordinarily clear. The moment they moved, their target was Ling Han. Furthermore, though Ling Han was the main target of their offensive, they had also been affected a bit by the battle axe's eye, and their movements had been an instant slower. For elites like them to exchange blows, could they afford this instant? Duanjun's fist had arrived, yet he saw Ling Han show him a smile. Gasp. In this instant, all the hair on Duanjun's body was standing on ends. At this moment, Ling Han's spirit should have been completely intimidated, and since it was as if his spirit was dead, he naturally could not possibly raise even a finger. Without the soul, the physical body would only be an empty shell. But Ling Han was actually smiling at him. Fuck, this was really too creepy. But now would he be able to stop? There was only this one chance. He gritted his teeth and his fist still fell. Ling Han moved. Though the battle axe opening its eye had indeed caused him some slight impediment, it was really negligible. In a mere instant he had already recovered. He very casually scissored his hands, and his 2 fingers clamped around Duanjun's wrist. The latter's fist was unable to advance the slightest bit further. All around them, everyone was dumbfounded and open-mouthed. Ling Han actually dealt so easily with such a powerful attack. Just how strong was this guy? At this moment, the attacks of Mao Shuyu and the others were finally delivered. Ping ping ping. They all landed on Duanjun and sent him flying. However, Duanjun's strength was also extremely shocking. Being struck simultaneously by 8 people, he actually was still capable of standing back up, though there was a trace of blood at the corner of his lips, and he appeared to be very weak. But even so, this was stunning enough. No wonder Duanjun was able to become the most powerful person in the Azure Dragon army. There would be no other person that could do the same thing as he could. Ling Han did not count. He had already far surpassed this level. Ha ha ha, impressive. Duanjun laughed loudly. As he laughed, he was still coughing up blood, yet he was completely uncaring, nor did he show any humiliated expression at having been defeated. What is your name? He asked Ling Han. Ling Han. Ling Han. Duanjun mumbled to himself and then loudly called out, all right, I will remember you. When you have time, we can share some wine and court girls together. Chapter 1692, Deciding the Plan. This guy was really not pretentious at all. Ling Han nodded and replied, we can share wine but forget about courting girls. Haha, what meaning is there in merely drinking wine together? Duanjun scoffed immediately. Are you so lacking in charm that no women are willing to throw themselves into your arms, so you are afraid of being humiliated? Don't worry, just follow me, brother Jun, and I guarantee that women will love you. At this time, Duanjun couldn't help but cough. It's enough that you lost and you are still publicly asking the other to share wine and court girls together with you here? Is that really proper? But that's fine too. The friendship between men is developed through sharing wine and courting women together. Ling Han was definitely worth attracting, and Duanjun's ability to make friends had always been trustworthy. The competition ended, and the reserve team had emerged victorious in a manner that no one could have possibly imagined, achieving the first place. They had also won the chance to participate in the major tournament in Black Moon City and the qualification to compete with prodigies that had come from over 200 other cities. This was too unexpected. Initially, allowing the reserve team to take part was for the sake of balance and fairness, but who would have imagined that this year's reserve team would actually be so powerful in truth? It was completely because of a single person that they forcefully took the first place. The 3 great clans all began a discussion centered around Ling Han. Both the Long clan and Duan clan undoubtedly prepared amazing conditions to draw Ling Han into their camp. As for the Ding clan, they conducted a fierce debate, discussing whether they would execute a strategy of beating down on Ling Han or to attract him into their ranks. In the end, the strategy to beat down on Ling Han got the upper hand because the relations the Ding clan had with Ling Han were already very poor, so even if they tried to draw him, they would definitely have less competitive power than the Duan clan and Long clan, so they might as well snip this bud while it had yet to bloom, and there was no need for further argument. Just look, Mao Dai's appearance had already affected the balance between the 3 great clans. Whichever clan he joined, that clan's strength would rise above the others because Mao Dai had a very high chance of becoming a 4th Severance Grand Elder. Without a doubt, as long as Ling Han managed to mature, he was practically a second Mao Dai, or perhaps even better. Just thinking that a day like that would come, the Ding clan felt slightly anxious. Don't forget, Mao Dai still has an unmarried daughter. Ding, who naturally supported the idea of becoming enemies with Ling Han. He menacingly said, a few days ago, it was also Mao Dai's personal command that transferred me out of the reserve camp, and he even summoned that brat for a personal audience. Hiss, what you mean is that Mao Dai also has his eye on this brat, and has the intention to marry off his daughter to him? Ding Gang, who was also a 1st Severance Grand Elder, exclaimed in surprise. The higher-ups all looked at each other, and they could see the seriousness in each other's expressions. Mao Dai has 3.5 stars aptitude, and would advance into the 4th Severance in less than a few 100 million years. And that damn brat also has 3.5 stars aptitude, and I even suspect that he had not shown his full potential. His true aptitude should be above even this. By then, 2/4 Severance Grand Elders would appear in the Mao clan, and the power structure of Dark Moon City would have to be rewritten. Even as strong as the Ding clan was, they only had a single 4th Severance Grand Elder, and that was Ding Yaolong. Though a few 4th Severance Grand Elders had appeared continuously in the history of the Ding clan, they all did not manage to cross over the step of dividing soul tier, and ultimately died in the Immortals' tribulation. In the celestial realm, time was still incredibly valuable. Even if you had an endless lifespan, if you could not ensure that your cultivation level continued to advance, you would ultimately be taken back by the heaven and earth. Mao Dai has a disciple that is quite interested in Mao Dai's little girl, Ding Yaolong said suddenly. Ancestor, what you mean is to think of a way to have Mao Dai's disciple and that girl from the Mao clan to become husband and wife? Ding Hu asked respectfully. In that manner, Ling Han could not possibly become Mao Dai's firm ally. Ding Yaolong smiled calmly and said, No, think of a way to have Ling Han and the little girl of Mao clan become a couple. All the higher-ups exchanged looks, feeling baffled. Weren't they afraid that Mao Dai would become allies with Ling Han? The two of them both had 3.5 stars aptitude, and if they were allied they could be nature-defying. Pa, someone broke out in applause and laughed out loud. Smart, this is really smart. This move from Ancestor is really incredibly smart. All the higher-ups turned to look at that person. You don't have to be so gross in how you're sucking up to Ancestor, right? That person explained, the key is that the disciple of Mao Dai, Xiaochen, right, likes that little girl of the Mao clan very much. If we could have Ling Han, that damn brat, defile the little girl of the Mao clan, just think, what would Xiaochen do? Kill that brat, of course, someone immediately answered. Haha, then wouldn't this lead to internal strife between Mao Dai and Ling Han? Even if Mao Dai thought that what was done, and just made the best of things by marrying his daughter to Ling Han, would Xiaochen be able to take this lying down? This guy could apparently advance into the severing mundane tier this time round, and by then killing Ling Han would merely be a piece of cake for him. Hee. These higher-ups all laughed. This was what was called killing two birds with one stone. As for how much hurt Mao Shuyu would endure in this matter, how could that be any consideration of these people? In their eyes there was only profit. For the sake of profit they could even sacrifice their own clansmen, what more when it was an outsider. Then we will execute this plan after Xiaochen advances into the severing mundane tier to ensure that there will be no mistakes. With Ling Han's strong insistence, the Empress went with him, heading to Black Moon City. How could he not bring her along with him? By now, Ling Han was completely hostile with the Ding clan, and if he left, what if the Ding clan harmed the Empress? In front of a severing mundane ancestor, no matter how much a prodigy the Empress was, she would not have any ability to resist. Ling Han did not want anything that would cause him eternal regret to happen. Even if the Empress had to become a military deserter, he would bring her with him inside the Black Tower. Thankfully, the great commander of the Dark Moon Army was Mao Dai. Though he was merely a figurehead, he still had that little bit of power. Duan Jun had indeed pulled Ling Han along with him to have wine, and even invited more than a dozen delicate beauties who were also very unreserved from a few minor clans of the city. When they saw Ling Han and Duan Jun, they would call them Brother Jun and Brother Han, looking like they were ready to accept their advances as long as they were willing. Duan Jun set himself free completely, having a woman on either side of him and taking full advantage of them. However, he did not go too far and did not overdo things with these women, which made these delicate misses all feel very resentful. Ling Han was even more direct. He was cold and kept all of them at a very far distance. To be honest, even if he was the lascivious type, with such an exquisite beauty like the Empress, would he still be attracted by such mediocre beauties? Duan Jun was quite a likable person. He was incredibly outspoken and not the type to beat around the bush with his words. This was very suited to Ling Han's tastes. Thus, the two of them had a great conversation and drank to their heart's content. After preparing for 10 days, the 10 members of the reserve troops led by Long Gaofei set out, heading towards Black Moon City. They boarded a large ship. Otherwise, the time needed for the journey on foot would be much too long. This was the celestial realm. That mediocre speed of Genesis tier was really inadequate. The large ship was huge. It was as long as 30,000 meters and also a few thousand meters wide. If it stood upright, then it would be a majestic mountain, but in this great lake that was akin to an ocean, this was not the slightest bit eye-catching. The waves swept towards them and the body of the ship swayed strongly. Even Ling Han's expression shifted slightly at that feeling of power. This was definitely something that could threaten his godly bones. Chapter 1693, Black Moon City. The waves crashed into the ship's body, and it would cause the ship to sway wildly every time. Even if Mao Shuyu, Wei Bo, and the others were all at the consummate level of the Genesis tier, they still felt an uncomfortable feeling of dizziness and wanting to vomit. Ling Han and the Empress were still fine. Once they locked their doors they could hide in the Black Tower, so who cared about the waves? The person who lived a secluded life was Ding Xiaochen. Not only had he lost to Ling Han successively, he had even publicly undermined him, so what face would he have left to face the others? However, he was really thick-skinned. He still came brazenly because this was also an opportunity for him. Black Moon City, a 2-star city? Don't think that there was only a gap of 1 level between 1 star and 2 stars. There was also just a gap of 1 level between the Celestial King tier and Ascending Origin tier, but just how massive was the gulf between the 2 cultivation levels exactly? What if he encountered a dividing soul tier elite in Black Moon City and gained his favor, with the latter wanting to take him in as a son-in-law or disciple? Then wouldn't he achieve meteoric success? In theory he could only achieve the 3rd severance at most, but if a dividing soul tier elite was willing to provide his valuable assistance, then the possibility of him achieving the 4th severance was extremely high. The gap of 1 severance was possibly the difference of 10 billion years of lifespan and being able to survive the Immortal's tribulation a few more times. Thus, even if Ding Xiaochen had to endure disdain from all the others, he would not give up this chance. The ship traveled very quickly, almost matching the speed of a full-out sprint from Ling Han. If it did not anchor midway, it would only need about a month's time to reach Black Moon City. However, this large ship was not for the sole purpose of sending Ling Han and his group. It also had the task of transporting cargo. Every time they arrived at the next city, a large amount of cargo would be unloaded from the ship, and a large amount of cargo would also be loaded onto the ship. Then they would proceed to the next city. With such delays, the journey would have to take about 2 months' time. Ling Han sat underneath the reincarnation tree, continuing to comprehend regulations. In the celestial realm, the spiritual chi was incredibly dense. It could at least ensure that a cultivator's rate of advancement would be maintained at an astonishingly high speed before celestial level. Of course, the prerequisite was that his comprehension of regulations would have to follow through. Otherwise, no matter how beneficial the environment for cultivation was, it would be pointless. And with the help of the reincarnation tree, it was equivalent to bestowing a pair of wings to Ling Han that would allow him to soar. He had just entered into the celestial realm for these few days, and he had already reached the peak stage of the Great Saint tier. He only had to accumulate some more origin power, settle his appreciation, and he would be able to break through to the Saint King tier. By then he was sure that even if it was a male or female saint from the major sects, as long as they were in the same cultivation level, he would still be able to suppress them easily. He was still drinking the heavenly tribulation fluid and comprehending the lightning element regulations, turning it into his own mystical power. Of course, he also left some for the Empress and the others. Because of physique, the others would only be able to consume it after entering into the severing mundane tier. Furthermore, Ling Han only planned to give it to the Empress and the Rain Emperor. That was because their natural talent at cultivation was outstanding. If it was given to the others, that would really be biting off more than they could chew. It would instead hinder their cultivation level, and that would be too much of a waste. Ling Han deepened his comprehension of extermination lightning, and the power of destruction was becoming more and more terrifying. However, lightning flash was not improved further. Instead, he had an additional mystical power, and Ling Han called it cracking light sphere. He could throw out a sphere of lightning and then control its explosion as he willed, producing a frightening destructive power. It could impact all the targets around him, but could not differentiate between allies and enemies, because this was an attack that had already been launched. However, if he was to use this technique, he would need to accumulate lightning regulations from around him, and the more time he spent on accumulation the greater its power would be, but it could not surpass a certain upper limit, or it would explode before he managed to throw it out. The Empress's advancement was even faster than his, but she was still slightly stalled by the barrier of cultivation level of the Saint King tier. She probably would break through before he did, but it would not be too many days earlier. 2 months later, the ship safely arrived at Black Moon City. Ling Han stood at the bow of the ship, and looked at the large city that had suddenly appeared in front of them. He couldn't help but be stunned because this large city was floating in midair. No matter how he looked at it, it was a great star, and there were also multiple smaller stars orbiting around it, but upon closer look, those were not small stars but rather multiple gigantic meteors. Like floating islands, there were tall structures erected on every meteor, and presented a grand sight. Black Moon City was above, and there was also another city on ground level that was astonishingly huge. It could match Dark Moon City in size, but compared with Black Moon City, it was pitifully small. This was the secondary city of Black Moon City. Usually, all traveling merchants and visitors would have to first undergo application for entry in this secondary city, and after their application was approved, there would be a specialized path to the main city. To directly fly up without permission? Then just wait to be blasted into smithereens. Entering the secondary city did not involve that many rules. One only had to pay for his accommodations and meals, or any other expenses. This payment was not made in gold and silver, but rather star stones. They first found an inn to stay in. Even if they were representing Dark Moon City in the tournament, they still had to write a report to apply for entry into the city, which would go through multiple levels of approval. It would take about 10 days or so to be approved. Since they were already here, they might as well take a walk around. Though this was just a secondary city, the grade of food and entertainment here were several levels higher than in Dark Moon City. For example, as long as you could pay, you would be able to even consume the meat of immortal beasts. Ling Han very much wanted to try immortal beast meat, but when he found out the price, he gave up the idea. 20,000 star stones for a single plate, and there were only 7 or 8 pieces of meat which were not that much thicker than a piece of paper on the plate. It was said that consuming immortal beast meat could greatly increase the accumulation of origin power, and even let one obtain celestial-level shards of great Tao to assist in the appreciation of regulations. This really was a good thing, but the price was also overwhelmingly high. How many people could really afford a meal like that? Even a first severance Grand Elder like Long Gaofei would only get about 100 star stones every year without any extra income. He would have to wait a whole 200 years' time just to have a single serving of immortal beast meat. Forget it, he would just come eat when he had the funds in future. This woman has a very attractive figure. Just when Ling Han and the Empress planned to leave, they heard a voice filled with vulgarity ring out behind them. It came from a young man that looked to be only in his 20s. Take off the veil on your face and let me take a good look. I'll treat you to a meal of immortal beast meat. The Empress cast a glance at him and waved her fingers. What she meant was, "Scram, I can't even be bothered to talk to you." Her slender hand was like soft grass, her fingers like green onions and incredibly tempting. That young man was already staring in infatuation, and couldn't help but stretch out his hand to touch the Empress's slender hand and said, "Woman, let me touch your hand. I am extremely accurate in my technique of feeling bones." The Empress's slender brow wrinkled and she pressed out a palm. Pung, a powerful force sugared out, and that young man immediately rolled backwards like he was a ball. He overturned many walls before he finally stopped, and his limbs were all drooping by then. He had passed out. Ling Han smiled slightly and said, "Come, let's walk around someplace else." They did not take this matter to heart. As they saw it, this young man could not possibly be any rich and powerful descendant in Black Moon City. Otherwise he would not have come to the secondary city. The highest possibility was that he had come with his seniors to participate in the major tournament of Black Moon City. That you're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.